welcome to another episode of the Tetracast. This is RPG Site's weekly podcast where we get the site staff together to talk about our favorite genre of video games. I'm your host. My name is Brian Vitale. Joining me, we have a slightly different crew here with me today. I have two familiar faces, Adam Vitale.
Hello.
We have James Galizio.
Hey, folks.
And joining us for the first time in a few months, we have with us Junior.
Good morning from Japan.
Yeah, so we are recording this in the middle of the day in the States, as we do, but, Junior is here. What time is it over there? 3 a.m.? So very much appreciate
3 a.m.
Very much appreciate you upending your sleep schedule for us. And we'll go into why Junior has joined us for this week. Of course, two of our other regulars are not available this week. Josh, along with a few other site contributors, such as Scott and Jess, are over in Seattle. They're having a good time at PAX West. A lot of those trailers, a lot of that information we'll be talking about today, but that is still kind of ongoing. It's obviously a holiday weekend in the States. I believe it goes from Friday through Monday, the PAX floor dates. And then a lot of publishers and studios kind of relay information parallel to the physical event. But that's where Josh is. He's played Echoes of Wisdom ahead of all of us. Chow just had a personal conflict, so we'll see him again next week. So it'll be the four of us holding down the fort here. It's been a kind of a busy end of the month. We have a couple games we want to talk about, and obviously the back half of the schedule just gets more and more packed. We have a few lingering details coming out of Gamescom. Of course, we had the deluge of news that always accompanies a Nintendo Direct. It was a partner showcase this week. We have a lot coming out of there. There was also an Indie World Direct parallel to that. So we'll talk about all that news stories here. But we're going to talk about something slightly different to open up here, and that is a release for the week, and that is something that I cannot speak to, but luckily that's why we have Junior here. We're going to be talking about World of Warcraft. I can't remember specifically the last time we talked about World of Warcraft on this podcast, not at length, because I don't think we did it for Dragonflight. I don't think we did it for whatever preceded Dragonflight.
I think now we're going to be talking about. I don't remember, but I think it must have been back when Zach's brother was still writing for us, because he was the main person that covered WoW for a bit, right?
Right. Yeah. And then I know they announced, if I remember right, they announced the 3 expansions kind of back to back to back. Like they kind of announced the package all at once about a year ago. And we're going to be talking about Go ahead.
Yeah. So specifically, from what I understand, they announced it in advance. It's like these 3 expansions are one story arc. The original creative director is back and basically is overseeing it. And is that correct,
yes.
Junior?
Yeah, so they announced, this is last year at BlizzCon, so this is November 2023, they announced the World Soul Saga, which is 3 expansions, the first of which is World of Warcraft The War Within, which is the one that just came out, right? And then the other 2 coming up in the coming years are World of Warcraft Midnight and World of Warcraft The Last Titan. So yeah, they announced those 3 all at once last year.
Yeah.
So Junior, tee us up. You have been playing World of Warcraft for a long time. I don't know if that's been continuously or kind of stop and go depending, but like maybe before we go into specifically talking about the War Within, apologies, can you just talk about, like, for those of us that aren't in that space, like, was there a lot more or less or an equivalent amount of excitement going into this? Was this going to be like a return to form, or I'm on the fringe here, so I just don't really know like what the anticipation was, what the feeling was before the War Within launched.
Right. Yeah. So, I guess before I really get into it, let me kind of go through my background. I mentioned I'm like or earlier before we started, I'm a 20-year veteran of the World of Warcraft. I started playing, for people who play WoW or played WoW back in the past, I started playing about 2 months before the Gates of Ahn'Qiraj opened, which was way back in vanilla. And I've been there for the launch of every single expansion up to Warlords of Draenor. So that's Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, Mists of Pandaria, and Warlords of Draenor. And World of Warcraft has evolved and shifted, as any game would, over the past 20 years, that people who maybe played back then are coming back to a game that's kind of unrecognizable now due to all the changes that they've made. I fell off of Warlords of Draenor due to some things that I may talk about later, but it's not really important. And then I didn't really come back until I played a little bit of Shadowlands, which was 2 expansions ago. Didn't really like it. And then I played Dragonflight and thought like, oh, this is actually pretty good, but there's just like something missing. And I couldn't tell you what that something was. It just didn't grab me. And then I came back for War Within, and it's hooked me. So there has been a bit of a buzz. Shadowlands was kind of like I don't know. They were building things, getting ready for the next future expansions after Shadowlands, but a lot of people were not really wanting to play it because the story in Shadowlands was pretty bad. Um, and the gameplay loop was also still not quite what it is now in War Within. So you still had people that were kind of like, "Oh, this isn't that great. Final Fantasy 14 is right there," you know. Um, I think this is the first time in many, like damn near a decade, that I can say World of Warcraft is actually really good right now.
And I know, like, even from the fringes, I've been seeing and kind of feeling some of that buzz myself. And I know part of the reason James jumped on recently, well, I'll hand the microphone over to him right after this, is because he was very eager to get in as well. So I assume he felt some of that same buzz. Because James, I know you've been also playing The War Within, and remind me, this is your first time playing WoW or your first time in a while?
This is my first time playing WoW. I literally started this week, and just so for full context, I'd been interested in trying out WoW in the past, but it was kind of a combination of there didn't seem to be a good time to do so. I thought about with Dragonflight because even though people were like seemingly kind of on the fence about the story there, and I went through Dragonflight's MSQ already, and I can just tell you it's very much a filler sort of story. It's not bad. It's just even if you know nothing about WoW, I don't think you're missing much because it's just kind of nothing. But I wanted to give it a shot, and it just so happened that now was a good time for it because I raid in 14. The next 14 patch is not until like November, like probably middle to late November. And since I raid in 14 and I got the raid tier done so quickly, I'm on maintenance mode basically. I'm just doing re-clears, and that just takes like 2 or 3 hours a week, and I can just not touch 14 outside of that. So if I wanted to try WoW, which I did, I figured, well, now's the best time to do so because I'm not really like having to worry about juggling 2 different games. Um,
Now, this might be an obvious question, but as someone who hasn't played it, when you say you've already beaten the main story of Dragonflight, are you allowed to go straight into Dragonflight from a fresh account, or is there like a skip ahead, or like are the stories in parallel? How does that work for someone
so
who's like?
so the way it works is that as of right now, when you load into your first character, it'll force you into the new leveling experience, which kind of isn't great for teaching you like background lore. I actually had to watch a couple of lore videos to get to grips with what the hell's going on. But it kind of introduces you to the gameplay. It gets you from level like 1 to 10, or I guess 1 to 15, and then once you reach level 18, you can accept the quest to start Dragonflight. When Dragonflight was current content, it was level 60 to 70, but now it scales to your level and it works as the leveling expansion. So you go
That is really
through
cool, just
so
on principle.
so you go through Dragonflight and then also do some dungeons and like side quests, and that should get you to the level you need to start the War Within. And the other thing about that is it immediately gives you access to the Skyflight system, the
Yes.
skywriting system. Yeah.
Yeah, so in Dragonflight it was called dragon riding, and it was the new thing. Like that was the big new thing that they were introducing in Dragonflight. So just to break it down real quick, it used to be flight worked how it does in Final Fantasy 14, which is you mount up, you jump up, and you're floating in the air, and then you just kind of fly along at whatever speed, and that's it. How it works now is you actually have a talent system for your mounts, that you can get talent points by collecting these glyphs that are in the air. And to fly, you have to kind of like double jump up in the air, and you have a meter. And when you're starting out, I think it's only 3 pips wide, but it can grow up to 6 pips. And then you spend those pips to maintain momentum. So it's a momentum-based flight now. You can boost in a straight line. You can boost in by gaining height. You can spend 3 pips to gain max speed temporarily.
Also, worth noting 2 things, because I just went through Dragonflight. The way they've changed it now is that you just get all of the talents on the skywriting skill tree from doing Dragonflight itself. You just
really?
unlock it like just by doing the story and leveling up.
Well, that's cool.
Also, the other thing I'll say is that there is like Junior said, there is momentum to it, which means that the pips only recharge if you're like either maintaining speed or gaining speed, which you do by like, and the tutorial for like skywriting actually tells you, hey, sometimes if you don't have any energy to like boost, you're going to want to actually like dive a bit so you can gain some momentum to help you kind of fly further. And like kind of like dive and then pull up and whatnot. And one thing that both Dragonflight and the War Within has is that in these zones you can actually find these like bronze like time dragon emissaries that'll be like, hey, do you want to do a race around this environment? I'll set up a racetrack where you can like do a time trial to see how quickly you can fly through these rings and stuff. And that's really neat.
So even on the fringes, I saw a lot of the marketing for Dragonflight about the new mounting system and like the momentum, uh, the, the dynamic nature of how it worked. But I'll be honest, with the War Within, I haven't seen something similar, and I don't think every single MMO expansion has to go to that level in terms of like we're introducing a brand new overhauled system. Like it can like tweaks, touch ups, more story, more of what we like can, in my mind, be equally valid. Does the War Within have like what is the War Within's analog to the Dragonflight added in Dragonflight, or does it have one?
Delves maybe. Also,
What are
there's
those?
so it's a new dungeon type that basically it. Junior, what would you say is the best analog? For me, it seems like almost like a mix of like deep dungeons from 14 mixed with variant dungeons. Sorta. Not a perfect analog, but something like that.
So not quite the overhaul that like the flight was, but like a tweak to an existing system.
No, not tweak,
Uh,
a new system. A new system.
Oh, it is a new system. Okay. So Junior, what we were wondering what you thought of the new Delve system or
I
Delves.
think that the Delve system is right up there with Dragonflight, or sorry, Skywriting now. I think it's just an incredibly well designed system. They clearly have a vision, because in the past, I would say all the way up to Warlords of Draenor, in the past, how it worked was you get to max level, right? Leveling was about as long as like Final Fantasy 14's is, where you have multiple days to get to max level. You visit every single zone in sequence, and then you immediately hop into dungeons, right? And then there's normal mode dungeons, there's heroic mode dungeons, and back in the day, that was it. They didn't have like a mythic mode, which we'll get into later. And then once you geared up from dungeons, you got into raids, right? You had normal mode raids, and then you had heroic mode raids. And heroic mode raids were kind of like the analog to Savage. But for solo players, there weren't really a whole lot of options, right? You either had to group up, or like that was it. Like there really
Do the
was no
dungeons and raids have matchmaking?
yeah,
Or do you have to do predefined parties?
yeah, they do have matchmaking. They didn't used to. Matchmaking was introduced in Wrath of the Lich King, through what's called the Dungeon Finder system now.
Okay.
But back in the day, it was the old school. Like you need to be in city and talking in trade chat to find people type stuff.
Back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah, back. Oh god, yeah. There's gonna be a lot of that. I'm sorry.
No, it's
Uh,
no problem because like I don't play it anymore, but I remember I was playing Fantasy Star Online 2, and they would add things that didn't have matchmaking. I'm like, I don't want to find people before. I just want to show up and be put in a place. It's
Right,
like
exactly.
when games don't have matchmaking nowadays, it kind of throws me for a loop. And then usually I think that encourages good behavior because these games are social by nature. So gee, you have to talk to people sometimes. But I do
Mm,
think matchmaking, when implemented well, is my preference.
we can talk about that because World of Warcraft does have a bit of a problem, or it used to. It's gotten much better, but yeah, nowadays, yes, people will typically be a little bit more polite about certain things.
Mhm.
But anyways,
It's
sorry,
definitely
getting
not it's definitely no Final Fantasy 14, I'll tell you that much. I've already
right.
seen some examples where it's like if you said something like that in 14, you would get banned. And you're not
Right, yeah.
yeah.
But getting back to delves, what delves are, if James didn't explain it, is they're instances where you can go in as a solo player and do them. They can be completed with up to 4 other people for a total of 5 if you wanted. But
But you have an NPC helper that you can level up and give different equipment that changes how they work. You can change the role, and also as they level up, do their stats improve, or is that just for unlocking different things you can equip?
their stats do improve, but at the tail end, like when you get Brand Bronzebeard to level 10, he gets a stacking level buff that just increases his damage and healing output by 10% each level, and it can go up to 50. So
And then
yeah,
how
you can
many
eventually
delves are like
5%.
are we talking about there's like 3 in the expansion, 10 in the expansion? Like I just don't know. Like is it did they add a whole bunch? Is it only in the new areas? Is it something that they kind of retroactively refitted to other
Mm,
older
Only in
instances,
the
right.
new
or how was
areas.
it on?
It's only in
Okay.
the new area, but I'm happy to say there's 12 delves. There's a lot of
Yeah.
Okay.
delves.
Also, as far as I can tell, unless you can unlock it later, you have to actually go to the location the delve is in. You can't just do it through like the dungeon finder. You have to actually go to it.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
And so what delves, just in a nutshell, really are just really really big rooms, or a series of rooms, and they're solo dungeons. You make your way through the delve. There's enemies for you to contend with. There's hazards like exploding spores, or maybe flamethrowers, spike traps, that sort of thing.
or like
Sometimes you're
a poison noxious gas where it's like you have to make sure you are doing things quickly because every so often you're going to have to pick up like an air purifier because if you're in the noxious gas, you're going to lose health, which when you're also contending with enemies, that's basically a death sentence unless you have like a good healer.
right. Well, even with a good healer, the stacking damage eventually gets to a point where you just can't heal it. And there's a darkness version that reduces your max health all the way down to 1%. So um, it's interesting. There's different traps for you to contend with, and also there's hidden treasures. So each delve has anywhere from 3 to 5 hidden treasure chests. And when I mean hidden, I'm talking like these things can be like on the banister that you can't access until you get a grappling hook type stuff. Like they're hidden. But they're in static places, so if you get stuck, can't find one on your own, you can always go to wowhead.com and look up a guide. There's respawning treasures as well that are tucked away in the corners that give XP to Bran, to help him level up.
Or
And
whatever companion you have, because there's more than just Bran as far as I understand it. So
no, I think Bran is the only one that's available right now. But then when season 1 starts, I think you get
gotcha. Yeah.
others. Yeah.
How do seasons work for though? Because we've talked a lot. Like I think a week ago, I talked about how the Guild Wars post expansions updates work. We've talked about in the past how Final Fantasy 14's major patches work. I really don't know for World of Warcraft. Like, does each expansion get a season appended to it, or is it changing now that they're releasing them more frequently? How does that
So
work?
yeah, so seasons are, for me, they're new. They were introduced, if not in Shadowlands, maybe the expansion before Shadowlands. Back back in the day, we didn't have seasons. When you hit max level, that was when you had access to content, and then they would gate it manually, right? So like Wrath of the Lich King, for example, the raid Ice Crown Citadel, you could only access the first wing for like 2 weeks, I think. And then 2 weeks later, they would unlock the second wing, and then there'd be the third wing, and so on. Because raids have like 12 bosses in them, right? It's not like World of Warcraft, or sorry, it's not like Final Fantasy where there's one boss per savage. Now, how seasons work is when the game launches, you have 2 weeks to basically do whatever, get to max level, work on your professions, yada yada. And then 2 weeks after launch, a season starts, and a season can run for several months. I want to say 4 to 5 months. So basically think about like how every Savage tier comes out months after the last one. So you have multiple months to get through the Savage tier. And then there's intermediary patches where they like do story stuff in 14 or, whatever. That's kind of the case here too. Each season has a story component, and then the raids unlock, and also Mythic Plus unlocks, which is a higher tier of dungeons. And those will run for several months. And then when a new season is about to end, basically everything's been unlocked for a while, but they allow like catch up gear to drop or something like that. Like there's usually an event to allow you to get like some really high stuff to get you at the end of the season, and then the next season will start and it'll just repeat the process until the next expansion. There's usually, I think, about 4 seasons per expansion.
So about 2 years apart then, if I did my math right.
Well, yeah, but with the World Soul Saga, I think the seasons are going to be shortened a little bit, because they're doing like, they announced 3 expansions all at once, but I could have sworn don't quote me, but I could have sworn they mentioned that the time in between expansions is going to be a little bit less. So instead of 2 years, it might be like a year and a half or something like that.
That's what my brain is telling me too, though I don't remember that specifically if they stated that they were going to be more frequent.
Right.
Okay, so that makes sense. So it sounds like it's kind of similar to 14, just kind of packaged in a slightly different way,
Mhm.
in terms of the pacing of story updates versus end game updates.
Yeah, and while we're talking about story, like it's weird because for the longest time, even all the way up to Shadowlands, uh, I would say after Mists of Pandaria and in between Mists, or sorry, Warlords of Draenor all the way up through Shadowlands, the story wasn't really something people genuinely considered or cared about. And I know that sounds weird, but there was a joke about Green Jesus for the longest time. And if you play WoW, you know who I'm talking about, but there's this character called Thrall, and he's been in Warcraft since like Warcraft 1 or 2, like the RTS games. Like he is one of the original Blizzard characters. And all throughout World of Warcraft, let me back up. In 14, you know how you are the warrior of light, right? Everything centralizes around you. You are the hero. Everybody is your support character. And it wasn't really until Dawn Trail that you kind of took a back seat almost and started letting other people or other NPCs take the spotlight. In World of Warcraft, you were the supporting character. The story elements were with Thrall and Jaina Proudmoore and all these other heroes of Warcraft. And you were a adventurer. You were a champion of the Horde or the Alliance or whatever. And that's still technically the case even now, but for the longest time, these characters would take such central stage that they couldn't be harmed or wronged in any way. Like when a character dies in World of Warcraft, it's kind of a big deal. So like in Warlords of Draenor, Thrall chased this enemy that you beat in a previous expansion all the way to a different dimension, basically. And instead of fighting him again in like a raid or a dungeon or something, it's just a cutscene where Thrall kills him. And that's it. You're not even in the cutscene. It's just them two duking it out. So the story for the longest time has always been kind of whatever, right? They've always done these cutscenes where other characters take care of things, or even sometimes they would write books and put important lore in the books and make you go buy the book if you want to keep up with the story, which was incredibly silly.
And the player
Now,
base just kind of went along with this because that was the status quo. That was just kind of
yeah,
what the game was.
yeah. World of Warcraft has always been more about the in-game activities, the dungeons, the raiding, the PvP. And so a
Mhm.
lot of people were just fine with the story being kind of whatever. There are people, don't get me wrong, there are people who genuinely care about the story. And there are peers that really tailor their characters to fit within, story confines. World of Warcraft is got a huge thriving RP and storytelling community. I'm not saying they don't, but the player base at large didn't give a shit. Sorry, I didn't mean to swear. They didn't really
It's
care.
fine.
Oh, okay. They didn't really
Yeah,
care
it's
about the story at large. Usually you get like some cool scenes. Maybe the bosses and raids are really neat, but that's kind of it. Um, War Within is kind of the first time I've in a very long time, probably since Mists of Pandaria, that the story has been engaging to the point where I'm shocked.
I'm as someone that this is my very first time playing a WoW expansion. I think the overall consistency of the writing in the War Within so far is this is going to be spicy. I think it's overall better than Dawn Trail.
oof.
I
So
I won't I
just
won't
just
go
just
that far, but I'll say it's right up there.
I
so
think that Dawn Trail
for someone
has
playing
it
through
has
this,
some pretty big writing issues. Not even talking about the stuff that people are like getting up in arms about. I just think that the way that, but that's a whole different discussion. Yeah, I don't know.
but just because I'm curious, like if you're progressing through the I'm not trying to describe it, the story part of the expansion, the baseline part of the expansion, not talking about the instanced end game content, the stuff, the treadmill stuff that you're intended to like do multiple times, but just going through the expansions, new areas, new story. Like how long typically for World of Warcraft expansion is that? Is it like 10
Hmm.
hours of story and then you go into end game, or is it significantly longer than that? I'm just curious.
Actually, less. So the cool thing about the leveling in World of Warcraft is you have options, right? If you just want to follow the MSQ, you can. And there were people completing the MSQ 4 hours after launch, 5 hours after launch.
Mhm.
Like you can streamline it. The game has scaling, level scaling in all of its zones, so you can just go through the entire MSQ, don't touch any side quests, complete the MSQ, and you'll be at level 76, 77.
And then
And
you
it'll
can
only
just do world quests from there to level quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, it gives the option of people again who don't really care about story or anything like that, to level through it, get through it. That way they give, kind of like a baseline of how you got to these zones, what's going on, right? The baseline story. But then for people who don't care about that, they just blitz through it and do world quests and get to level cap, and then they focus on the end game.
Just to tee me up, world quests.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So
No, no worries.
when you hit level cap, when you hit level 80, and you complete the main story quest, you unlock world quests. And what these are every couple of hours, a world quest will pop up on your map, and it's just repeating, like going back to zones and repeating quests that you maybe have done or side quests that you may have done, except you get max level rewards. So instead of getting, like maybe some experience and some gold, when you come back and redo these world quests, you can get a piece of max level gear, or you can get a lot of gold, like 800 gold instead of 20. Or you can get these like shard components that you can use to upgrade gear.
Are they randomized or are they like on a schedule on a timer?
Randomized.
Cool. I keep drawing parallels to like Guild Wars, Fantasy Star, Fallout 76, kind of different sort of game.
Mhm.
And some of the things there that I have always kind of learned to deal with, because that's just how the game is designed, is a lot of their analogs are scheduled. Like, oh, in 2 hours, this boss is going to appear, and then everyone just sits waiting for it, and then they beat it down. And then in 1 hour, this boss is going to appear, and then everyone just sits waiting for it. So I don't know. In principle, I kind of like the idea of it being more random, a little bit more
There,
organic, and a little bit more of a surprise.
Yeah, there are static world quests like the theater troupe event, which is every 40 minutes, I think. A play will appear, and you can assist the play by doing stagehand stuff like cleaning out the kobolds or whatever.
I kind of
Um,
like the idea of that.
yeah, so you can assist with that, and that's on a fixed timer. But all the other stuff is randomized.
Cool. Have either of you made it to the end of the story quite yet, or no?
Oh, I've completed every quest already.
Oh,
Like even the
sweet.
side quests.
When,
Yeah, I've done everything.
remind me, when did this launch? And I don't know if it had like tiered launch timing or anything like that.
So they did. That's actually the only complaint I have with War Within is they did this. It used to be, well, back in the day, it used to be that the quickest you could play the expansion was how quickly you could get from the brick and mortar store that you bought the game to your house and install it. Right? Like you would buy a
Yep.
CD in a box, and they would make you, put it in your disk drive, something that computers don't have anymore. Uh, and but Now what they do is they did what Final Fantasy 14 did, which is if you pre-order the game.
Not quite what 14 does, because I'll say one thing. Uh 14, first off, the baseline price for Dawntrail was $40, or was it 50 now? No, I think it's 40,
It was
right?
40.
Yeah. Early access was just like 4 or 5 days if you pre-ordered the expansion and you already owned the previous expansion. For the
Well,
War Within,
well,
you had to buy the $100 version to get the early access.
hang on. What I was saying was previous WoW expansions worked like that. You pre-order the expansion and you get the game. War Within's thing is a new thing. That is not something that they used to do.
Hmm.
They
Did they
did,
do it
yeah.
with
So
Dragonflight, or was it totally new for War Within?
totally new for War Within. People, if you wanted to play early access, which was 3 days for War Within, you had to pay $40 more than the digital deluxe edition. Because the digital deluxe edition is $60 or
70
was
bucks.
70 bucks, sorry. And that used to be what got you, early access. Now you have to digital deluxe owners could not get early access unless they upgraded to the Epic edition, which was over $100. Blizzard, that is, if you're listening, which I know you're not, that is some scummy shit. Okay, I don't like that. Nobody did. It
Now, just
was one of the most complained things on the forums.
now, if now that the expansion's out, is there any value proposition to the Epic package now,
Uh,
or is it?
you get some mounts, and you also get a month
Battle
of game
pass.
time. But one thing I will say that I've noticed is that, so I knew about the whole WoW token thing where people could like sell them on the market board for like golden game, and then you could like redeem them for game time. I didn't realize how relatively cheap they are if you're like at all like used to playing MMOs. Like, even as someone that just started playing WoW, I looked at the going price for a WoW token, did the math on like how you could get gold from even just selling old equipment to vendors. It's like, if you play the game regularly at all, like even just like 8-10 hours a week, you could probably afford WoW tokens to pay for your sub once every like 2 or 3 months.
That is correct. Yeah, it's only like 200,000, 250,000, somewhere around there. That price will probably go up now that people know that War Within's good, so more and more people are going to play. But yeah, the token's pretty cheap. Don't pay the $20 price tag for the token. You can earn the token in game.
Now, this isn't specific to the War Within, or maybe we can make it so. I was just curious. Like, I assume the game is class based. Like, what class you guys play as, or race?
Mhm.
I'm very much coming from an outsider's perspective, so sorry, my questions are very green.
Oh no, it's fine. So
So I was just curious, yeah,
um,
what type of character you guys play?
yeah, so the game is split up into two factions, right? So you have the Alliance and the Horde, and each faction has their own individual races that have their own individual unique qualities. So, for example, an orc has a racial trait called Blood Rage that they can activate every, I think, 2 minutes or maybe 5 minutes. I don't remember. That gives them bonus, like main stat or something. It makes their hits hit harder. Meanwhile, the humans get something like I think it's called Every Man for Himself, where they can escape from a crowd control effect once every 2 minutes. So there are different unique racials for every race, and there's 12 baseline races, and then some more races that you can unlock.
Yeah, like I know that the Earthen are like a kind of sub race of dwarves you can unlock now that seem to be really, really good for tanks.
Almost
Because
unlock, yeah. They don't
Yeah.
actually unlock until season 1.
they'll pretty soon anyways. And like one of their things is that they're always well fed, and they also have like a baseline like defense buff or something.
I
Or
actually
damage
haven't
reduction buff, I think.
I haven't actually looked at the Earthen because you know me, I like foxes. I play the fox race. I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
But the Earthen.
Because I saw a video about it that was like kind of going over some.
Here we
bit. I
go.
know.
So the Earthen have their active ability is called Azurite Surge, and it's a 2-minute cooldown that blows fire damage out in front of them, but you can hold the button and charge it to 3 tiers. So the first tier deals damage, the second tier also heals allies that get hit by it, and then the third tier boosts the fire damage if you hold it all the way. And then they have some passives where you can get increased additional rewards when you gather, like with a gathering profession. And the always well fed buff, which means that they can't eat food because makes sense. They're stone golems. They don't need to eat. But they can activate this ability that allows them to eat a specific gem, and that gives them the benefit that they would get if they could eat. So it's kind of a different way of getting that bonus stat without actually needing to learn cooking or anything like that. And then they have a flat armor base bonus and a flat exploration experience bonus.
Yeah,
So,
I think
every-
I'm gonna.
Oh,
I
sorry.
think once those unlock, I'll make an alt for like. I haven't tried tanking yet, but I feel like that would be a fun like kind of. I don't know what applicable like classes they can play as. I'm sure at least some sort of tank though. So
It says here that Earthen can be hunters, mages, monks, paladins, priests, rogues, shamans, warlocks, and warriors. So you're looking at 1, 2, 3 tanks.
because monk can be a tank, paladin can be a tank, and warrior can be a tank, but depending on the
Correct.
specialization. So yeah, I'll probably do like a earthen paladin. That seems like it would be a good time.
So how the class system works, since we were talking about it, is you only have one class per character, right? So like I play a priest, specifically Shadow Priest. And every class has 3 or 4 if you play Druid, or 2 if you play Evoker. Has 2 to 4 specializations, and you can swap between these specializations outside of combat at any time. So, for example, paladins can be healers, they can be tanks, or they can be melee damage dealers. Whereas mages can only be damage dealers because they're magic casters. So each class has 3 different specs. So mages can be like a frost mage, a fire mage, or an arcane mage, but they can never be a tank or a healer because would you want a book nerd, trying to hold aggro? Probably not.
Apparently, monk can be either a DPS, a tank, or a healer, which is weird. Which, yeah,
They can, and actually, it's even more complicated than that. They can be a ranged healer, or they can be a melee healer using something called fist weaving. This is not an official thing, like supported by Blizzard. Like it's not an official specialization, but you can dip into certain talents that make it to where when you punch things, you heal people.
neat.
That sounds neat.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And I'm guessing over the course of the game, since obviously it's got how long has WoW been out now?
Over
I know
20
it's kind of
years.
like so I'm sure like there's been different eras of the game where certain class party composition, certain builds have been vogue or the most effective healer or tank or DPS changes
Mhm.
based on the balance, based on what's added, based on what's been nerfed or buffed. So I'm sure there's kind of been whole different eras of the game where everyone played this or everyone healed with this specific class, or this class had its time in the sun, but it's not as vogue anymore. Things like that.
It back in the day, it did used to be like that. Like when Death Knights first came out back with Wrath of the Lich King, Death Knights were so strong, basically the entire expansion. They were called a hero class back then, and they did away with that moniker because they wanted the idea that in order to play Death Knight, you had to have like a max level character already, and you had to have all these requirements met.
They still call them hero classes.
Oh, do they? Oh, okay. Well, the intent back then was to make the hero classes pretty strong, but to have certain unlock requirements behind them. But then they realized, well, wait, why would anybody play any other class if
A
the hero
non-hero
class
class,
is going to? Right, exactly. So they did away with that idea. In balancing at least. But they've done pretty good about making classes kind of all float within each other or have a unique thing that they can bring to the table. So for example, there's two types of priests can be two different types of healers, right? You have a holy priest and a disciplined priest. And holy priests are more about like just raw throughput, right? You press button, you heal people. Makes sense.
Mhm.
Disciplined priests, on the other hand, are more about preventative healing. So you have shields that you can put on people, and then you maintain those shields or buff them by damage dealing. So by casting damage spells, it will auto target a player to heal them and maybe put a barrier on them, like a power word shield. And so it's just two completely different ways of playing. Fire mages are really good at burst damage, whereas frost mages are more, sustained damage. And then arcane mages have a lot of procs, I think. It's just they have a really good way of making each unique spec within a class different, but making all of them viable. Now, for world
And I'm guessing
firsting,
a lot of that.
go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm guessing a lot of that. I'm conjecturing here that depending on the design of the encounter, there might be specific encounters where we say we need high burst damage here, or there might be some encounters where they say sustained damage is more effective because the boss moves around a lot, or something like that. Where certain fights, certain classes are just more adaptive to
Yes.
fitting the needs of that encounter.
Yes, and this is where WoW fight design, I think, personally trumps 14 fight design in a lot of ways, because when you go into a raid, right, the first boss is almost always going to be what we call like a patchwork fight, almost. Not quite a patchwork fight, but there's this boss in one of the raids called Patchwork, and he's literally just a big guy with a lot of health that does like line AoEs that you got to move out of, right? Like he's super simplistic. And the first boss in every raid tier is always going to be a very simple fight. Not necessarily a stand and do nothing fight, but a fight all the same where
Straightforward.
straightforward, the mechanics are easy to learn, that sort of thing. But after that, you don't know what well, you do if you play like the PTR, but generally the fights are going to be a lot more varied, where like sometimes you'll have what's called a council fight where there's 3 bosses and they share the same health pool. And sometimes one will, I don't know, become invulnerable and start buffing the other 2, and you got to, do something to break that invulnerability or something like that, right? Or sometimes there's swarm fights where like you'll fight a boss, but he'll summon a ton of these like little nasty bugs or whatever that you gotta kill. The variety is incredible. And like you said, yeah, some classes and some specs are really good at AoE damage. Some are good at what's called cleave damage, where maybe they're really good at doing AoE up to like 3 to 5 targets, but then once you get beyond that, it's like kind of like non-existent. And then you have some specs that are just really, really good at focusing on one target and blowing them up.
So if there's a couple fights in a row that are swarm fights, that single target DPS might be really good in a lot of other raids, but just in this particular fight, you want someone with AoE, or you want someone with a high amount of cleave.
Well, yes and no. So, like I was saying real briefly, for people who do like world firsting content, they're gonna level multiple classes to max level. and they're going to keep multiple classes on standby in case like they come to a dungeon, or sorry, they come to a raid fight where it's like, oh, we got 3 bosses, it's a council fight, so maybe we want this spec instead. They'll do that, but for normal people, they're not going to sub you out or anything if your class is maybe really, really good at single target damage and they need AoE damage. Like they're just going to say swap your talents to pick, maybe more AoE focused talents. You still won't be as good as the other classes that are really good at it, but you'll be doing better than what you were. So there are options
Okay,
within your spec. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds really cool. Can you change like characters mid raid or no? I'm just curious. Like if you had another alt built up and you wanted to, are you allowed to, or is it kind of once you go
Yeah.
into the raid, you're locked?
So how lockouts work is when you enter the raid and defeat a boss, every character that defeats that boss is locked to that raid. So
Oh, okay.
you if me and James go into a raid and we both take our main characters in and we kill a boss, we're locked to that raid. We have to we've killed that boss, and we cannot get loot from that boss anymore until the weekly reset. But
Well,
if
I
I
meant like
wanted, well, right, I'm getting to it. But let's say
okay,
the
sorry.
next boss, maybe we don't need a priest, right, or whatever, and I want to play my shaman. Um, then what I can do is I can just say, okay, hold up real quick. I'll log off my priest, log on to my shaman, and then they'll just summon me. And if we kill the next boss, then my shaman gets loot from that boss, and I'm locked to that raid. But my priest can go do a different raid and fight that boss and get loot from it if they want.
Okay, so the lockouts are character bound. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, they might have changed it for the new feature for this expansion called War Bands, where you have 4 characters that are like your main characters, and stuff that you unlock is like shared across these 4 characters. It might be like that now. I don't know. The War Band system's still new, and we don't have raids to like
Yeah,
check
no
it
problem.
out. So
Well, I think it kind of I feel like I know more about World of Warcraft now than I have for like the 20 years it's been out in the 40 minutes that we've been talking about it. You guys have done both a really cool job explaining what's exciting about the War Within, just kind of like what WoW has done well. I mean, obviously it's had a long history, so it's had better periods and worse periods. You yourself talked about different expansions that you were more lukewarm on versus others. But it's cool just to hear kind of the different perspectives of James coming in as a big Final Fantasy 14 vet, you going as the World of Warcraft vet, but also based on your discussion, it seems like you've played a significant amount of 14 as well.
yeah, I've done Savage rating with a variety of groups over the years. I was a 2.0 player back when 14 basically relaunched, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say nonstop because I have taken breaks in between, but I have played 14 religiously since then. I just
And
play a lot
then
of
I know
MMOs. Yeah.
everyone who's listened to this podcast knows that a lot of us wish we had more time because a lot of them I wish I could be there with you guys, and part of it's like, well, what's stopping you, Brian? It's like, oh, I could.
I will say
This is the
this.
most excited I've been about even just talking about WoW in a while. So I'm really glad that we brought you on and to talk about it today.
Yeah, I just want to end on this note. If you're sitting on the fence about War Within, right, because you're like, oh, I've never played WoW, it's got such a storied history, I don't know. Every expansion is sequestered enough from the previous expansion that you can jump in, like what James is doing right now, fresh player.
Yeah.
You can jump in and start playing the new content with everybody. It's not like 14 where you got to suffer through years and years and years of content. You can literally jump in and start doing the new stuff. You might be lost on the story, and I get that. But everything that makes WoW, the end game content, the world quests, the new profession system, which we didn't even talk about, which that's like an hour discussion on its own, but it's really good. Everything that's new, you can jump in within a couple of days. So if you're on the fence, buy the cheapest version of the expansion, give it a month, right? Get a month subscription, that's $15, and then I think War Within's what, like $40, just the baseline.
War Within is 50.
50. Okay, so you're looking at the price of a new game for a month sub and the expansion. but you might be pleasantly surprised. I think that there's a lot to enjoy about the expansion. I just want to warn you that you're going to need to adjust your expectations with the community, because
I alluded to it earlier, but I've already seen, like, even just in like trade chat, okay, some people, and keep in mind, the game automatically put me in a new player server, and I'm seeing some pretty like, okay, that's
um
yeah.
yeah, so I think it comes with the territory in that World of Warcraft is an old game, right? And you have a lot of these people that have been playing, like, EverQuest since EverQuest came out, type stuff, that shifted over to World of Warcraft when World of Warcraft first launched in 2003. You have these like boomers and Gen Xers that they're just really shitty people, and they really enjoy playing World of Warcraft, and so they're going to keep playing World of Warcraft come hell or high water, and they're just going to be assholes. I will say though that it has gotten much better. Yes, I have reported a few people already, but it used to be I would just mute trade chat entirely and never look at it, to now I can kind of tolerate it a little. But the big thing is you can just find a guild, right? There's hundreds of guilds that are really chill, LGBTQ friendly. Find a guild and just stick within the guild, and you don't have to worry about these people at all. You can mute trade, mute general, and never interact with these freaks.
I'll be honest, like, I've been getting a lot of people inviting, like, sending guild invites because it's like, oh, somebody actually playing that's new.
Oh, you'll
I
get those, yeah.
Yeah, I got a random invite to a guild called Potheads, and I was like, you know what, that's funny.
Yeah.
And I actually looked into the guild chat. It seems like they're chill, so it's like, okay, I guess I'll just stick with this for a bit, see how that works. I have no idea what I'm doing, so whatever.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about any of these people that are like being assholes. And you can report, like, I report transphobic comments in trade all the time. And when you report somebody, you automatically put them on your block list. So you never see them ever again. You remove them from your site. Uh, I wish Blizzard would do more public, like, hey, we're going to start banning people for hate speech type stuff, because there's no place for it in any online community. And Blizzard has gotten a lot better, or they did before they fired all of their support staff. But they had gotten a lot better about handling tickets like that. I don't know what they're doing now.
Didn't Blizzard just get unionized? So that's, I guess, something good.
Perhaps I haven't been following. I don't know. But yeah, if so, that'd be great.
Unfortunately, it's just kind of a almost like a requisite of being, it's gonna sound a little bit highbrow maybe, but like an internet denizen is like, whether you're on social media, whether you're on the RPG site comments, we put that banner there that says like general awfulness will not be tolerated, and then people still just put down other people for no reason and hate speech, like you said. And you just
Right.
got to make liberal use of that block button, find like-minded people, whether it's a Discord server or a guild in a game, and
Yeah.
usually you can kind of curate your experience in that way to
If
surround yourself with like-minded people.
Yeah, if you're coming from 14 and expecting like the almost toxic positivity that 14 can have sometimes,
I wouldn't say almost toxic positive. It's very much toxic
okay.
positive.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, if you're coming from this 14 where you're used to people being like, please don't tell me to deal damage as a healer, it's very mean and makes me feel bad. Even if you're being super polite about it, you're not going to find that here. If you're doing,
I ran
like,
a dungeon last night where it went smoothly. The tank never died. Nobody ever died, and it was done really quickly. And then, like, as we were leaving, the tank said "garbage heals."
Yeah.
Right as you left.
Yeah. And that just comes with the
okay.
territory. So you could totally just mute party and never talk to these people.
I will say though, that was the one specifically bad experience I had with somebody in like a party being like deliberately toxic like that. And even then, it was like after the actual like thing was done, where it's like you didn't have to say anything, but at least it wasn't. At least
During
that
the
person
dungeon.
probably didn't even fucking see it because they probably were already like out of the like party
Right.
instance.
And I will say personally, I've done a ton of heroics because I'm farming a very specific enchanting recipe. I've done a ton of dungeons. I have not had any toxic dungeons at all. In fact, I've had people really just go, "Oh wow, we're doing really good damage. Let's keep it up." Like people can be nice in dungeons. It's just a dice roll.
Well, once
Yeah.
again, thank you, Junior, for jumping back on. And sorry if James, if you had one more thing to say, because I was just gonna say I don't know when the next time we will be able to talk about WoW would be, but it'd be cool to hear a follow up
Yeah.
and however
I
long time is appropriate for that.
I mean, like I've been saying on Twitter, like I wanted to check it out and I was assuming I would just play a little bit of it, but I'm unfortunately actually really liking WoW, so probably I'll still keep playing this.
And
Which yeah.
and I will definitely. I'm also locked in, so I'm probably going to play throughout the season at the least.
The
And
one prevailing opinion I've seen is I don't know how long it's going to be good, but it's good now, so I'm going to keep playing it.
yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Absolutely.
The other game that we had slated to talk about this week, we had a couple. This next one we might, because of the extended WoW talk, I might save a lot of this for next week. We had originally planned to talk about Visions of Mana. Of course, at the time of recording, it released just a couple days ago. We do have a review up on the site. Cullen Black wrote one up for us for this game. Unfortunately, the game has been in the news because its developer, Oka Studio, Ouka, Oka. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Unfortunately, they were formed by NetEase a few years ago, midst of the pandemic to form console games, and NetEase has already, as reported by Bloomberg, talked about how they're planning to shut down the studio right as their initial debut project released. So obviously, terrible news for the developer. Um, we're wanted to talk and kind of celebrate Visions of Mana. I keep wanting to say Trials, Visions of Mana. Uh, but Adam and I have both been playing it. I think Adam, you said you're in like chapter 4. I'm still in chapter 1. I have not had a ton of time, but it's actually I'm a fair ways into it and still in chapter 1. But I think we just looking at the schedule, we might have more time and space to talk about Visions of Mana more concretely next week. And we'll see if we can get Cullen on because he has wrote the game's review for us up on the site. So we'll see if we can get him on. No promises. We'll also have Josh and Chow back potentially. Does that sound okay with you, Adam?
I'll just say one thing about the game, and
Okay.
we'll revisit it next week. So, like, I'm in chapter 4, which is, I don't know, more than, let's just say roughly 10 hours in. The chapter 1's a bit longer than the other chapters so far. And it's a well-made game, and some of the environment art and, like, palette and all that is really good, and Colin mentioned this in his review also. But, like, I'm not really feeling it yet, and it seems like this is a pretty common sentiment regardless of who you talk to. Even like in Colin's review, which go read it on our site, it took a while for the game to grow on him. So I'm not so like disparate from what his feelings were at this time, but like the story of the game so far is very traditional, very typical, very Final Fantasy X, very Tales of Symphonia, and I'm just kind of like I'm waiting for it to be like, okay, where's the hook? Is this gonna be just exactly what my expectations are for this sort of narrative, or is it going to betray them somehow? I'm like waiting for like the other shoe to drop or something, or is it just gonna be pretty straightforward? I don't know. Because where I'm at right now, it seems pretty straightforward, like very predictable, very traditional, and it hasn't grabbed me there yet. And also, I think like the mechanics to the game, the combat system, and all that, they're all just like fine. It's okay, and so it hasn't really hooked me yet. I'm kind of playing it because I'm waiting for that. I'm still waiting for it to hook me. Basically, I don't hate it, but I'm not really feeling
I
it
guess
yet.
I have two. I guess I have two other comments, and I'm very early, like I said, so I will revisit next week once I've put more time into it. First of all, one good, one bad, I guess. One good is that I do like how economical the game is in terms of with its cutscene and dialogue. Like nothing really lingers too long. The story pretty quickly. In a way, it almost feels shallow, but I also I think I'd appreciate it going brisk rather than just being like drawn out and melodramatic. So I've kind of enjoyed just like the straightforwardness of it in some way. It feels really comfy, almost nostalgic for like that late PS2, early PS3 era of JRPG. So that I've actually kind of liked. I do agree with you in terms of the story being uh very predictable in terms of like I don't always feel like it's not always inherently better for your expectations to be subverted. Like there is overdoing that, but in this game, I think I feel like it kind of needs it. One thing that I will say is that the economy in terms of like treasure chests and gear, like it feels very Final Fantasy 16-ish, where it's like, oh, here's another treasure chest. I bet it has another candy item that heals 100 HP that I never use. Oh, here's one with 50 gold in it, and just like I'm never really excited to see a treasure chest and open it because you've only got the one weapon, which are mostly, as far as I can tell, from shops. Your one armor, which as far as I can tell are mostly from shops, and then you've got your smattering of healing items, revival items, a lot of items that are like temporary boosts to money or EXP gain. And that's the sorts of things you find in the treasure chest, which is just I've never been excited to open a treasure chest. And you might say, well, that sounds pretty specific, but that means I'm not excited really to explore these environments too much because if I find a treasure chest tucked away on the corner of a ridge that you kind of have to jumping puzzle your way to get to. It's like, oh yeah, I made it here. It has 100 gold in it. Woo! Like that's kind of dampered my
the
excitement a
exploration
little
does
bit.
kind of feel like a collectathon. I don't know about you, but when I'm in a new area, you're sort of like running from blue dot to blue dot, and
Mhm.
like gathering grizzly, what is it, grizzly syrup, and maybe yellow dots on the
Yeah.
way. So it's fine,
But even the
but
grizzly syrup is like, as far as I can tell, the best thing you can get from grizzly syrup is like, yay, I ran around and I collected 10 grizzly syrup. I can trade that in for a potion that increases my strength by 1, and my strength's 44. So do the math on what percent increase that is. And maybe this is chapter 1 stuff, so I'm open minded to
no,
like,
I mean
well,
I'm on chapter
it
4 and
starts
it's
out
pretty
slow.
similar. So,
Okay, I'm hoping for it to ramp up, but yeah, we'll talk more in
but
detail next week for
but
that.
again, I know like Cullen felt similarly when he was playing the game, and I remember even he was talking in our chat where like when he was going through the game, kind of relaying his thoughts at the time to us. At the end of the game, he's like, "All right, I'm in now. Eventually, like he had eventually sold. He eventually got sold on it. So I'm kind of waiting for that.
How
So
I feel like how PS3 era is that where it's like it's good 25 hours in, or maybe that's just exactly what this game is, but we'll see. And obviously we'll get more perspectives on it next week because I was looking at the release calendar, and we'll talk about this maybe at the end of the podcast. But the first, September 10th through the end of September is jam packed, but the first week of September, at least in terms of our site's purview, is a little bit of a breathing room.
Can't wait for Astrobot.
yeah, let's say I think Astrobot is what James is going to be getting. So
When does that come out?
The 6th.
Okay.
all the
Well,
RPGs
maybe we'll
had
be
to get out
talking
of the
about
way
Astrobot.
for Astrobot.
There you go. And then, of course, we have a lot of news to talk about in terms of Nintendo Direct. One of the things that came out that has always kind of been fringe RPG purview is Castlevania, Metroidvania, specifically Igavanias. And they announced the Castlevania Dominus collection that was shadow dropped at the Nintendo Direct earlier in this last week. And we weren't planning to talk about it, but Junior has played through, or at least started playing through some of it as it was released. So, Junior, I guess you have just a little bit of a short time here to talk about your time with the recently is it remastered or is it just a port dump? I'm not actually sure too much about exactly what was released last week with the Dominus collection.
It I I believe it's just a port dump with tweaks and updates. So I don't know if I would go so far as to call it a remaster because like you still have pixel graphics, right? The mechanics are virtually the same. The only difference that they made so the Dominus collection is a collection of games that were primarily on the DS, which is a dual screen system, right? And the biggest change that I noticed, other than like the pause menu and you can save wherever and stuff that you would get with a remaster normally, the only difference that I've really seen is you can instead of drawing sigils in like Dawn of Sorrow, you can do QT button presses instead. Which I mean, it makes sense, obviously, right? You're playing a game on PC, probably with a controller, so you don't have touchscreen capabilities unless you, I guess, use your mouse. But I think mouse control
Yeah.
might actually be a thing you can do. I've never done it.
I know that on PS5, I was seeing people say that you can use the touchpad to emulate the touchscreen.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
So yeah, I guess I
Um,
buried the lead, but it's Dawn of Sorrow, Portrait of Ruin, and Order of Ecclesia. Ecclesia. Uh,
I don't know how to pronounce Ecclesia.
mhm.
That's what I call it. And but I've only really played through, like, I started a file on Portrait of Ruin just because I wanted to hear Jonathan Charlotte. And I did start a file on Dawn of Sorrow because Soma Cruz is my favorite, but I wanted to play through what I think is the weaker of the three, Order of Ecclesia, first, um, before I get to the good stuff. That way I don't get burned out, I guess. And it's virtually the same as I remember it from when it first came out. So I don't think they really changed much. But if you
Well, I mean,
like,
I'm sure even
oh,
the
go ahead.
upres is appreciated because isn't the DS like 400 by 240 or something like that? So even just
Oh,
playing it at
right, yeah. Um,
720p.
One
I
thing that
didn't.
I did notice people actually caught was that even though the pixel art, obviously, you don't notice the upgrade resolution, the 3D assets in the background for some areas have been upres because the internal resolution is actually higher. So,
Right. But they didn't do, or at least it's not on by default. I didn't really mess with the settings too much. They didn't do like the weird pixel smoothing that a lot of these remasters tend to do, where it just like smudges the pixels together to make some AI looking horse, like, garbage. Um, it might be an option. I didn't see it. Straight out of the box, it was just straight pixelated, which is nice. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's Egavania. If you liked any of those three games ever in the past, I think the collection's $30. Um, they play great. I haven't found any really big issues with it, except Order
Is
of
it Switch
Ecclesia is still
exclusive?
hard. Sorry.
Is it Switch exclusive or is it also on Steam?
Oh, it's on Steam. I've been playing it on Steam.
Okay, cool. I guess the reason I was wondering is like just I don't know the history of or the Switch digital purchases between consoles when the Switch 2 is supposedly imminent would make me a little bit hesitant, but hopefully they have an elegant solution for that once they finally do reveal what the successor looks like.
Yeah.
And of course, we'll have a lot of news to go into in what was announced at the Nintendo Direct. A lot of big surprises there. Before we do that, though, we do have a lot of written articles up on the site, different reviews and previews, and one of these at least is written by James. We'll let him speak to it. A couple of these are from Adam from last week, and then there's a few others previews from one by James and one by Alex. So let me just go through these. Adam talked about these on the podcast last week, but we did get some write-ups up on the site, so I'll go ahead and shout them out here. Adam had the chance to go hands-on at the Xbox event in LA that was parallel to Gamescom, and he got to play a little bit of Avowed, or at least see it be played. No, you played it, right? Hands-on?
Yep, played it.
Yeah, so but if you listen to last week's podcast if you want to hear about that. But Adam wrote up his preview up on the site. Basically, the title is Avowed's enjoyable Gamescom demo makes me want to check out Pillars of Eternity, which of course Avowed is set in the same universe as the two Pillars of Eternity games. And we kind of talked about that last week, so I'm totally not surprised that's your takeaway. And then Adam also wrote a preview for the free-to-play game from Stoic, the Castle Crasher like, I guess that's what I'm thinking of it as now. Left to right brawler sort of thing. Towerborne. So you were also able to go hands on with that as well. Oh, we already talked about the Visions of Mana review that Cullen wrote is up on the site. Another recent release that has a review up on the site is Gundam Breaker 4. This, of course, is in Josh Torres' realm, so I'm sure once Josh is back on the podcast, we'll talk to him directly about his time with Gundam Breaker 4. I think Chow's been playing it as well, I think. I know Scott's been playing it too, so we might get Scott on. But Gundam Breaker 4, we'll talk about it on a future podcast, but we do have a written review up on the site. As far as I can tell, it is a promising return to form compared to New Gundam Breaker, which seemed to have disappointed most people in that fan base. Here's another review that I'll let James speak to. James, you wrote up a review for Emio, the Smiling Man, Famicom Detective Club. Just kind of tee us up for what this game is, because you ended up rating it pretty highly.
Yeah, so back in 2021, Nintendo randomly revealed and then released full-blown remakes for the Famicom Detective Club games that were originally released on the Famicom Disk System. Like by now, it's been almost 40 years. I think it's been like 35 years since the last one, like Girl Who Stands Behind. Yeah, yeah. Um, and I thought they were pretty good. I thought that the original game, since there wasn't too many changes, was a bit dated with progression because it was a bit obtuse. And I thought Girl Who Stands Behind was a lot better. And overall, as a package, I gave it an 8 out of 10. So unbeknownst to us, I guess like in the middle of the remake development, the team was like, you know what? We should make a new one. And there's been a bunch of stuff coming out from like Nintendo themselves with like interviews with the development team about how that came to be. Emio the Smiling Man is really, really good. Like, and it's kind of hard to talk about games like this because even though like Famicom Detective Club isn't a visual novel in the sense that something like The House of Fata Morgana or Steins Gate or Higurashi or Umineko is, it's more an adventure game, like a text adventure game. Uh, Still, the core conceit and the main reason you'd want to play this is the story, and it's always kind of tough talking about that without like spoiling like what makes it good. But I really enjoyed the story in this one. I feel like when I played through the remakes of the original Famicom Detective Clubs, I enjoyed what it was going for, but I felt like maybe the story was just a little bit too simplistic or like naive in some aspects. And maybe that's not the best way of putting it. But the one thing that stood out to me, and I know Colin too, because he also reviewed it for like Nintendo Insider and gave it a 10. Uh, Both of us were like, man, there's actually some depth and humanity and like some real heart to the story this time around. That the first two games, while they were good, just felt a little too basic. And this one, there's definitely some substance to it, and I really enjoyed it. I definitely recommend it. Obviously, these types of games aren't going to be for everyone, but if you are into these types of games or are interested in it, yeah, I definitely recommend it. Like, give it a
Can,
shot.
can I ask a question real quick? So
Yeah.
I've never played a Famicom detective thing, but James, I really do like um, maybe some of the more horror leaning visual novel type games, or games that have like the interactive element, like Deathmark or um, crap. I forget
So,
the name of the title that uh, is set in
NG,
Japan. No, I did play that too, but
the one that's set in Japan,
that
it
doesn't narrow
just
the
came out.
list down.
The Square Enix one that came out like last year.
Yes.
Fuck, what was it called? I've
Paranormal
played it.
Site?
Yes,
Paranormal Site. Yeah,
Paranormal Site. Thank
yeah.
you.
I would say that it's a similar gameplay style to Paranormal Site, but Emio, while there are elements that are a bit creepy, I wouldn't really say that it's scary. There is one exception that I cannot talk about because of the embargo. Well, the game's out now, but I don't want to spoil it anyways. There is one thing that you unlock after you finish the game that is really, really neat, and that is maybe a bit scarier, but not even scary, I'd say. But I don't know. Uh, I think you would like it. I think you would
Okay.
like it, but it's definitely one of those things where it is M-rated. It does touch on very, very serious subjects, but I wouldn't say that horror is the point. There is like horror elements to it, but it's more of like an anxiety rather than like jump scares or anything like that.
Well, and that's kind of like the difference between horror and spooky. Like, even if it's not scary, if it's spooky, that kind of gets the same vibe, which is how I would kind of describe Paranormal Site. Spooky, but not scary. And when you're
Right.
describing this game, you're like, not everyone is into these sort of games. Like, yeah, I appreciate it for being well made, but I don't think it's for me. And then you describe it, compare it to Paranormal Site, and I'm like, wait, I played that and I loved it. Maybe I should
Well,
try this out.
so the more the question I was asking was less of like, is it a horror game, and more, um, is the mystery elements similar to those games without like, because I don't like jump scares either. I like horror games. I don't like games where like you see this creeping man like pop out from behind a corner or whatever. Like that stuff's stupid. I don't like that stuff. But Paranormicide and Deathmark, even though they do have jump scares, they're more about solving a mystery than actual like trying to scare you, and that's more what I was looking for. So if that's what this is,
that's basically what this is. It's the mystery does get explained pretty succinctly by the end, but and I'm not sure if that's like a turn off or like because I know different people have different feelings about that. Like one of the big draws with like say like Umineko is that while you do learn like the main like mystery by the end, there's still a lot unexplained, and I don't know. But yeah, I do think that this is a good game, I feel like, to recommend for anyone that wants to get into these styles of games. It is M-rated. It does touch on serious subject matter, but it's not scary enough where I feel like that I couldn't recommend it to most people, even if they're against like kind of like that sort of like horror element, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And would the other Famicom Club games be similar in that vein, where they're like more mystery, like solve my puzzles 3 or whatever, as opposed to having creepier elements? Because I figure if I'm going to play Emio, I should probably play the others as well, even if you don't necessarily need to. I want to personally.
Yeah. The one
Okay.
thing that I think that the like Emio does that really makes it hard to go back to the other ones is that, again, those are remakes of Famicom Disk System games, and in that
Oh.
sense, they are very obtuse. Very obtuse. Like one thing, for example, is that you're gonna want to use a guide to proceed. Uh, the good thing about Emio is that they changed. Well, they expanded upon the way that the think function works. Whereas before, you would have to use think to specifically like move the plot forward, and then if it otherwise it would just be nothing, would tell you absolutely nothing. This time around, you can use the think function, and it'll give you like a brief kind of like hint about how to proceed, because the main character is like thinking about, okay, what do I need to do here? And it means that it won't 100% tell you what to do, but it'll make it far more easier to progress. Whereas in the other games, again, you're gonna need a guide.
Okay.
Well, that's
Cool.
both
Thanks.
James and Cullen giving really high marks to Emio the Smiling Man, Famicom Detective Club, available on Nintendo Switch. So really high recommendation for that. We have a few previews here. James, you did write a preview for Metaphor ReFantazio. Of course, that's one of the big games that we have circled for October, aiming to be one of 2024's best RPGs. Metaphor's had a lot of different preview opportunities. Where specifically was this? Was this Gamescom or when was this? I'm just trying to tie it in my head of when this was.
When I was in New York for a couple of days, yeah, that was for the
Ah,
Metaphor preview event. I even said as much because I was able to say I was in New York, and I was even able to say that I was there for Metaphor. I just couldn't say anything about what I played until the preview embargo lifted.
yeah, because Adam was going to LA, you were going to New York, even though you're from LA area, and then
Yeah.
people going to Seattle, people at Gamescom in Germany. So okay, so you were in New York looking at Metaphor ReFantazio. Did you get to go hands on with the game?
Yes, it was basically that was the final preview event. I got to play about 4 hours of it. And whereas like during Summer Game Fest, like we had a chance to play almost an hour of the game, but very, very briefly in the grand scheme of things. And it was like 3 separate chunks of a demo. And I think it's fair to say, and I'm pretty sure Adam would agree, that we didn't really get to learn too much about Metaphor during Summer Game Fest. We just the bare minimum, and it didn't give us an idea about the gameplay loop or anything like that. I can now pretty succinctly say that I understand the gameplay loop, and one of the comparisons I made on, I think I did in the preview, like itself, but also on Twitter, I said is it kind of reminds me about how like the Atelier like Dusk games like Esken Logi and Aisha handled like their gameplay loop, in the sense that like obviously like Atlas games are no stranger to like time management and having to plan ahead for like how you're going to handle like what you're going to do each day, what you're going to do like across a playthrough. But Metaphor, it's even more of a focus in the sense that you really have to like in the preview itself I mentioned like I picked up a side quest where it asked me to take my gauntlet runner to a specific section of the map surrounding this village. And one of my party members even outright told me, "Hey, that's a bit out of the way. Maybe you shouldn't do that unless you very specifically have other things you can do around there." Because otherwise you're just wasting time that you could be doing like spending elsewhere. And it's very neat because like you actually have to look on the like world maps like, okay, there's a gauntlet runner, like a different gauntlet runner from someone else like vying for the throne, like in the royal tournament, like around here. If you go that direction, then you're probably going to run into them, and you do. And it's one of those things where you want to make sure that you plan in advance to try and hit things like on the same route if possible, so that you're maximizing the what you're getting from the time spent, because it's always going to be a baseline amount of time to go from one section to another. And if there's multiple objectives on the same path, then you can deal with them at the same time and not have to worry about it. But if you're only doing like one thing at a time, you're going all over the map very quickly. You're going to realize you're running out of time, and what you're managing to get done within that time frame is going to be very limited. So
There was another game that we were talking about on the podcast earlier this year. I don't remember what type of game it was, but it was a similar sort of idea where it's just like you probably won't get to see everything like I'm sure by the time Metaphor releases that, or once it's released, people will start to distill optimal routes, efficient ways to play through the game. But as a first time person playing blind, yeah, you can definitely try to focus on being efficient with where you're going and making sure that you're trying to hit multiple objectives when you can, but you will miss things. I guess we talk about it in terms of like Saga a lot, where it's like you're not
yeah,
going to see everything perfectly. You just kind of have to go with it, and that's kind of like a true or quote unquote RPG, where you kind of have the consequences of where you decide to spend time, quote unquote, in that game is a decision made in an RPG that you have to deal with the consequences of that. So I know for some people, at least I know for me, that's sometimes I have to get myself in that mindset. Otherwise, I'm like, no, I missed something. Oh, I wish someone would just detail it out. I hate missables in a game, things like that. But then sometimes it feels like it actually makes it almost empowering in terms of knowing that, yeah, I focused on doing this objective or seeing this event or seeing this quest line through, and therefore that's what I got rewarded for it. And I might not have seen everything to its through line, but at least I was able to focus on what I wanted to see. It's of course it's difficult for me to talk to it because I have not gone hands on with Metaphor. But just the way you described it there, I can see myself kind of really enjoying that or really being frustrated by it, and I kind of have to see how it ends up playing in my hands before I can make a final call on that. I know,
yes.
Adam, I don't know if this was based on your time with Summer Games Fest or the earlier they're like, I know we got like a 19-minute gameplay demo, and they're deep in the marketing of this game now. I know we've gotten trailers basically weekly for this game for the last couple of months. But you said you had kind of really like scrutinized what they've shown and how people trying to compare it as like fantasy Persona or something like that really isn't quite hitting the mark. I don't know if there was any like detail there to kind of explain it like I'm five in that sense.
Well, first of all, sounds like Junior has to head off. It's a different time zone,
Oh, okay.
so
Yeah, we've
Yeah,
already kept
sorry.
Junior
Thank,
in the
yeah.
twilight mornings of the hour. So sorry that I didn't see that in the chat here. But yeah, no, thank you so much, Junior. It was really cool having you on to talk about World of Warcraft, as because that's something I don't think well, James getting there now, but none of the rest of us as regulars on the podcast could really speak to. So whenever there was announcements, we kind of couldn't really talk about them at any level of authority. So it was really cool to have you speak to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I'll be playing throughout the season at least, so I'll definitely have a follow up in maybe a couple weeks to just see how it's going. But thanks for having
Are
me.
you planning on doing a review for the expansion? Because we could.
We could Can I?
Yeah, you can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
take your time
when the
for these MMO
wait,
expansions. Like, just make sure you have experienced what you want to and everything. So
yeah, I'll wait until the season starts because that's when like the meat and potatoes of the end game really hit. But after that, yeah, I'll have a review up. Thank you.
all right, sounds good.
yeah, no pressure, but you could if you wanted.
Yeah.
I will. I will.
All right.
All right.
Wait,
Have a good one.
It's recorded now. Thanks, Junior.
Bye.
All right, to answer your question, so at the LA Xbox event that I went to, they had the Metaphor demo and they had a new spot of it, like a new section of the demo that wasn't on the Summer Game Fest demo. Now, I didn't need to play it for 4 hours like James did, but it was basically like, oh, you picked up some quests and you have some objectives. You can either go this way on the world map to the right, and it takes so many days to get to your destination here, or you can go this way on the world map and head to this place, and there's different things along the way. And my takeaway was, after playing this demo, I played it a couple of times actually, was, this is something that's pretty new to Atlas games in general, in that like you have a decision to make, like how are you going to spend your time, and like it's more than just in a Persona game where it's like, oh, you have to clear the dungeon in 3 weeks and now you have just like 20 days or whatever to like build your social links, and you choose how to spend time there. But this is a bit different in that you're like journeying across the world, to which objective do you want to complete. You have one or the other, and different events that can happen along the way. James sort of mentioned that these can occur, and I obviously haven't played it for the hours that James has, but it's just kind of like, this is where the game feels most different to me than anything that Atlas has done before. And I also had a similar kind of thought in terms of like how SMT5 did like the open world design. Now this is obviously not like open world, but like this sort of like world map journey is like Persona games don't really have that. And neither do, most SMT games really. So this is new. And actually, we'll talk about it maybe briefly later, in the latest live stream like video that they did for Metaphor, Hashino quite literally declares this journey element to Metaphor, is how he calls it, is what sets it apart most basically distinctly from Persona and SMT.
Also, like the time management thing, it really is like the key focus of the project, because they even like said at the preview event that one of the core tenets of Metaphor is anxiety.
Like, which choice do you like? Which way do you go? And hopefully you don't make the wrong choice, and you have only so many days to finish your objective. I don't know.
Well, it's now that Adam's explained that as well. I kind of have the same feeling that I tried to put to words before, where it's like sometimes that anxiety can be good, but also it's anxiety. So like sometimes being just a little bit stressed or put in a tense position can be really rewarding once you manage your way through it. And we might as well just go ahead and talk about that trailer. Their world tour video. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So this is the fifth. So we've said this before. Atlas, I think, does a pretty good job in like releasing pre-release trailers and footage for their games. In fact, I think we said it last week. Sometimes it might be almost too much because they release a lot. This is, I think, the fifth live stream video. They call it Atlas exclusive that they've done for this game, and that's not even counting like just the trailers themselves, which I'm sure there's like 5 separate trailers already. And this one is specifically on the world tour, as it's called, in terms of like you can go this way or that way. There's different cities that you go to. James mentioned this in his preview, where like you can get information in town. You can pick up bounties. There's these objectives you pick up, and there's all tied into all of this is like your bonding with your followers and your supporters. That's maybe a little bit more like Persona-ish, but it's more like in the context of you're getting support for the candidacy of the throne, for your candidacy to the throne, and then you have like your virtues that affect which quests you can take on and whatnot, which are sort of like social stats in Persona. So there's some like shared DNA there, but like the context to a lot of things is different, and then this world map structure is of course very different. So I think it's the most interesting part about the game, and it's also seems to be the most unique part about it.
And like one thing I mentioned in my preview, and it actually stood out to me, is that They did a really good job with the second half of that preview event where they chose to like let us loose, because it really gave like there was not enough time for everyone to do everything that we could in that section of the game. So people had to pick and choose, which ultimately meant that like after everyone was done, we were talking amongst ourselves, being like, so what did you end up doing? What'd you find? What'd you do? And I was one that discovered that there was the whole thing where it's like, okay, if you got this like information from the broker, this specific boss and this specific enemy type in this random dungeon had a weakness that wasn't like an elemental weakness directly tied to the press turn system, but something inherent to that archetype that interacted with this enemy. And they made it very clear that it's like, yeah, there's going to be more of that in the game, where it's like, even if it's not an elemental weakness that you can tell through the game systems that way, if you think about it, there's going to be certain archetypes that are stronger against certain enemies that you're going to have to think about or find like information for. But there will also be some that are especially weak to specific enemies. And that's like fascinating to me.
It really does kind of sound Saga-ish. Sorry to be like I get Boss Baby
No,
vibes from this sort of thing, but
No,
that's
I
that's
was
the way
thinking
I'm
Saga
thinking of it.
too.
So,
Also in this world tour video, and kind of part of this journey element, the way that Hashino puts it, is like the dungeoning element of it. And actually, Atlas, SMT especially, has like a dungeon crawler kind of history, but and of course Etrian Odyssey is in there too. But like there's a big focus on dungeons, like both side quest dungeons as well as like main dungeons well, obviously side quest dungeons you might run into as you explore the world, and then main quest dungeons that probably more or less you have to run into. And so there's going to be a big focus there. And one of the dungeons they talk about is actually you're inside. This is, I guess, not a spoiler because they put it in a live stream, but one of the dungeons in the game is you're inside a giant worm, and you have only so much time to get out of it because you're going to get digested.
That's dope.
Yeah.
anxiety on top of anxiety.
Yeah,
So James wrote up a preview up on the site for his time with Metaphor ReFantazio just in this last week.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was going to be playing it at like launch, but I'm definitely going to now. So yeah.
October is insane. I think Adam tweeted about this, but yeah, we have Metaphor kind of predates a lot of the heavy hitters, but like then within a week it's Romancing SaGa 2, Ys, Dragon Age, and then a week later Mario and Luigi, and then a week later Dragon Quest III. It happens every year, so we shouldn't be surprised. But
And it's like even next year, it seems like okay, there's gonna be way more like RPGs. It's like God.
all right. And then we do have one other preview up on the site, and this is one that I wasn't expecting, but it makes perfect sense. This is coming out of Gamescom. Alex got to see a little bit of a game that was just debuted earlier this year. It first showed up in June as I forget which summer event it was, but Sandfall Interactive debuted Claire Obscure Expedition 33. This is the turn-based Western RPG sort of thing, involving the paintress and the expeditions that go out yearly to stop her. This was kind of a highlight of one of those summer gaming shows. Really drew a lot of eyes on. It had a really flashy art style and combat stylings. Drew a lot of comparisons to like Persona in terms of the way that the UI interfaces with the turn-based combat, interfaces with like the reactive button presses for parrying, dodging, perfect strikes, things like that. And Alex got to see the game again over at Gamescom and wrote up a pretty cool preview on it. And then in addition to that, Sandfall Interactive did release another about 10-minute gameplay trailer showing a lot of cool environments, showing a lot of gameplay, a few dialogue cutscenes. And I remember at the time, this was something that drew a lot of eyeballs, and we're like, this is really promising and really neat. And after reading Alex's preview on Expedition 33 and seeing the new gameplay that they showed for it, my excitement is still pretty high. It's slated just generically for next year. A lot of what they're showing is in terms of like the UI, the animations, the environment art. It all just seems to gel really well. The only thing that they showed in the new footage for Expedition 33 that I thought felt a little bit like work in progress, which it is they showed off a little bit of a grappling hook mechanic where if you look a certain direction, you see a button prompt and then you kind of you hook shot over to it like Legend of Zelda style. It was kind of fun on paper to have that sort of like uh traversal mechanic in that way, but the implementation felt a little strange. Like your camera had to be facing the right way. But
Man,
it's a
they really
trailer,
liked
so
Persona 5 then. That's a royal thing.
uh, I've not played Persona 5, and that's on my list. Yeah, even in his preview, Alex drew a lot of the Persona comparisons, and I can kind of see why, especially with the way the UI works out. The the uh the cutscenes that are that like the gameplay shows it's kind of like a bunch of vertical slices stitched together, a few regular combat encounters, a few dialogue cutscenes, a boss fight. The dialogue cutscenes feel a little bit floaty to me. Like, almost like the lip sync doesn't perfectly match. It does match, but just something felt a little bit off about it. I'm not exactly sure if I can put to words exactly why I felt off, but it was fine. Um, and then the the gameplay, it shows like characters leveling up. It actually shows like what your EXP bar looks like when it's filling up at the end of the fight, and like a lot of UI elements that are haven't fully been shown, but they've been teased in terms of like skills, talents, traits, however the long-term progression works in this game. The three party members that we're aware of, a little bit more um, discussion and kind of a hint of what the story might be. And then the environment itself is really unique. It's like the bottom. I don't think they're actually underwater as far as I can tell, but it's like at the bottom of a coral reef with like giant tall walls of like overgrown underwater vegetation. Like, it's hard to describe. You should watch the trailer, but it's a really cool environment. A lot of the environment art and character art looks really well done, especially for a debut project. Um, really feels like it has a lot of talented, visionaries behind it. I think it looks really cool. But yeah, we do have that preview up on the site, so go ahead and give that a read and give the trailer a look at. I think that covers it for reviews, previews, those sorts of things. So we'll go into news, which we don't really slow down because, like I said, we had a Nintendo Direct this week, and that means always a lot of news coming out of it. Though this first thing that I have listed, I don't think anyone expected, or if we did expect it, we weren't expecting it here of all places. And that is that we finally got our first look at the long rumored remake of the original Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, the first. It showed up in the Nintendo Direct, Partner Direct, in a montage without any real like fanfare. Like, it wasn't booked as like a headliner, but I do think it was in terms of our site's purview. And it just seemed Adam, how did you word it earlier at the end of the Nintendo Direct?
Like they just shows up and refuses to elaborate. Is that what you
Yeah,
meant?
basically. Yeah,
So
it's
like I think even James wrote I think people generally expected a remake to happen eventually because Falcom has basically said so a handful of times, and
they've been
James even
coy about
reported
it.
on this
Yeah.
like on
Yeah,
our site. But
basically,
I don't know. We just didn't
we
expect it here. I think. So.
yeah, we didn't know for sure if it was like a full remake because they said like a new version, and it's like really I've known that something like this was coming for a couple of years because even back in like 2022, there was like a Famitsu like interview with Kondo that I translated where he said like verbatim that he wanted the rest of the Trails series on Switch. And that meant that Trails in the Sky was coming to Switch sometime. We just weren't sure what sort of form it was going to take. If it was going to be a port of like maybe the Evolution versions, or if it was going to be a remake. That was the first time we got a hint that something was going on there. And considering how far along this seems to be, and the fact that it's a worldwide 2025 release, it's very clear that this was already like started development when he had that interview, which is why he said what he said. But yeah, nobody expected this to be here. It was literally a jump scare because it was in the middle of the sizzle reel. It's like, what the hell? But
It's like, wait, you can't just blow by that. What are you doing?
yeah. So this is very weird. So we have English screenshots. We have an official announcement that it's going to be coming worldwide 2025. It was even listed like on the Nintendo Direct, and it wasn't just a mistake because there are English screenshots. Falcom does not have a publishing partner yet for the West, which that's important. And they even like responded to a request for comment by Gamatsu for this. I've seen some people speculate about a bunch of different things about this project, and there's not a lot that we know, but from the response that Gamatsu gave, the fact that there are English screenshots already and everything else, there are a few things that we can glean. First off, the localization for this is based off of Xseed script. I need to make it clear there is no evidence that Xseed owns the script. And in fact, we've had multiple games that have come out, even within the last couple of years, that have used scripts from a different company's localization. And it seems to be relatively standard in the games industry that the parent company owns the localization.
That's pretty typical. Like if a localizer, they translate a game and create a script, that script is actually owned by the publisher.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's always true, but that's definitely, we've seen it with like Atlas games or Atlas translations of back in the day when they did some of the
Kogyo effects, Utaru Mono. We've seen it with even in Falcom's case where there was like the .emu ports of East Origin, which used the Xseed script. So anyways, it doesn't matter in that sense that like regardless, this translation is based off the Xseed script. We have like enough evidence to show that that is the case. But importantly, Falcom's been very explicit where they said that they're not sure how they're going to handle distribution yet. What they haven't said is that they're unsure how they're going to handle localization. And the fact that there are English screenshots already, and they've made it clear that they don't have a partner yet for publishing in the West, makes it one thing we can know for sure. Falcom's handling the localization for these remakes in-house using the Xseed script as a base. That's a bombshell. Like, I don't think anyone expected Falcom to handle any localization in-house. And now all of a sudden they have a reveal at a Nintendo Direct with English screenshots like provided by Nintendo of Europe, making it clear it's like, yeah, we're handling this in-house for a worldwide release. It's probably going to be day and date with Japan.
Nintendo of America had the screenshots too.
Yeah, well, we originally got them from Nintendo of Europe, but the point's like, that's besides the point. Like, I think a lot of people are sleeping on the fact that it's like, we are getting probably a Falcom release day and date with Japan with these with this game.
Yeah. No, I just don't know. Like, I imagine eventually they'll have to announce like a distributing partner for like a retail release, like probably something relatively similar
My guess,
to Xseed and Cygames. Where
my guess is it's probably actually going to be Xseed, because in the past, like Falcom has deferred to Xseed for re-releases of games that they originally localized, like with East Memories of Celceta, Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2, and most recently East Felgana. I think that they're probably going to go to Xseed first and give them right of first refusal. So I think that there's a decent chance that Xseed is the one that handles any physical release of this in the West. It could still be Nisa. It could even be Falcom from all we know, because who knows at this point? Nobody expected them to handle the localization themselves. So, but it's not what I expected to get jump scared by in the middle of a Nintendo Direct, and much less the like follow-ups and being like, oh shit, this is a bigger deal than even just it being a Trails in the Sky remake, which is a big deal on its own.
And just to be clear, I know Brian didn't watch the Nintendo Direct live, but like it you know how a lot of like game announcements in Nintendo Directs, they have like, some sort of like, build up to like the announcement or something in terms of like introducing like a trailer or whatnot. But this was just like immediately you see
when
Estelle
we say
running.
It was a jump scare, that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah, it was just immediately
like first shot was like, so they had, how in Nintendo Directs they kind of had those like compilation like of here's stuff up and coming, like
right,
and it's like a couple of seconds each. Right at the start of it, you saw a shot of like this like rustic home with like light coming through the windows, and I didn't think it, but I was like, that kind of reminds me of Trails in the Sky First Chapter. I didn't think it was Falcom. I didn't think it was actually Trails in the Sky First Chapter. But then 5 seconds later, there's Joshua playing his clarinet,
harmonica,
and it's like, oh god, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Man.
And then Noisy Pixel just recently reported on a broadcast from Dengeki saying that Falcom has mentioned that there will be like elements from the series that are better reflected in the first game. So what that actually means, like, are certain characters going to be referenced earlier than they were originally
They're gonna reference Ash.
conceived?
I'll say right
Yeah,
now
and
they're
that's
gonna reference Ash.
okay. I was avoiding that, but yeah, like obviously Ash is a big character that was like, yeah, I'm not gonna say anything else, but yeah, and there's been jokes about like Reen will show up
Somehow.
in the middle. Yeah. Um,
Maybe
Noisy
Anois will mention
Pixel
Reen.
conjectured that maybe Van Arkride will show up. I'm not sure. I haven't played obviously the second
He
Kuro game,
wouldn't.
but
He wouldn't. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, but I was about to say, like, does that make sense? I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of par for the course for Falcon.
Uh,
They've done it in previous evolution versions before with what is it, Juna showing up in Crossbell,
Yeah.
things like that.
the other component to this announcement is that it is currently only confirmed for Nintendo Switch. And when asked about it, Falcom basically just said, it's Nintendo Switch for now. I expect other
Yeah.
platforms to eventually come, but it's nothing else
Yeah.
is official yet.
One other thing I'll say is I've seen some people that aren't like as up to speed with Falcom. I've seen some people try and argue that, oh well, obviously it's also going to be announced for PlayStation and PC soon because that's their main platforms, and they don't. And I've seen some people even say, oh well, they don't develop their own Switch version, so obviously there's a PlayStation version to be announced. One, Falcom said themselves that the main platform for East 10 was Switch. And ever since East 10, well, no, ever since like Nayuta's Switch version, they've handled their Switch ports in-house. Like Daybreak's Switch port is Falcom. Daybreak's 2's is Falcom. East 10 is Falcom. So just the fact that it's a Switch version doesn't mean necessarily that they also have a PlayStation version day and date. They might, but that in and of itself is not proof because Falcom does make Switch versions these days, and they have been for a couple of years. So there's that. Two,
I was gonna say it's one of those things where they're just kind of being coy, where it's like that's we can only report on what has actually been confirmed. They said we announced the game for Switch. They have not made any comment anywhere else, so that's what we can say. It's no, well, obviously this or of course is that. Like, well, they maybe, but they haven't announced it.
I would expect there to be a Switch 2 version because there was a thing like a couple East 10's Switch version has the colored buttons that people have been speculating kind of ties to like probably what the Switch 2 controllers are like. And Daybreak has the same thing. So that alone was enough to kind of raise some eyebrows. The fact this is coming out in 2025 and as of right now is a Switch exclusive, I wouldn't be shocked if what might have happened is maybe Falcom made a deal with Nintendo in order to secure access to a Switch 2 dev kit so they can support the platform early. That's just entirely speculation on my part, but it would make some degree of sense. Especially since, especially this week, because, the PlayStation 5 got a massive price increase in Japan, and already, there was, an open, secret that while the hardware sales for the PlayStation 5 in Japan have been high, the software sales have been so low because most of those PlayStation 5s were actually being sent overseas to, China. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if this might be a sort of wider pivot for Falcom as a company. And maybe the reason they're doing this with Trails in the Sky is it's like, well, if they're going to try and court the Nintendo audience to jump onto the Trails series or Falcom in general, Trails, a remake of Trails in the Sky is a great spot to do it because I'm sure everyone here has already seen people that have been interested in the Trails series but haven't known where to jump on. I've seen people just outright say, "Oh, finally a Trails game I can comfortably jump into and not be completely lost." So
yeah, even with Daybreak, I was like, yeah, you can jump on here. there's a couple references, but they're at this point they're mostly for fun. Where here's like unequivocally like, yes, jump on here, this one, circle it, this one is right here.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but my initial inclination whenever they announce something like this is like, I wonder if I should download the original to my Steam Deck and just play through it, because I don't know. I did that when like Final Fantasy Rebirth was first announced, is I just played through the original. It's a little bit of a different paradigm there, but like I kind of want to see like, all right, here's what the game was, because it's been several years, at least 10 since I've played it, and now that way when I play through a remake like that, I can kind of see like, oh, they decided to do this instead, or oh, they presented this in a way that was a little bit different.
I'm actually feeling similar for like Dragon Quest III or Romancing SaGa 2.
Yeah.
I played
Also,
both
like,
of those games, but it's been a
I'm
while.
also just talking about like the remake itself. Man, it looks gorgeous. Like,
It looks, I really like. Yeah, I don't have the vocabulary to really speak to it, but the art style is faithful, but like it feels like a modern Falcom game, but it looks like, yeah, that's what Trails in the Sky would look like in a modern, rendering. Like
yeah,
I'm
it's
not
like
sure
the art
exactly
style
what they did
is
to achieve
different,
that.
but it's like faithful enough, and it maintains the feeling of the whimsy of Trails in the Sky, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
Which I
doesn't
hate
feel like,
using.
oh,
I hate
it's
using that word, but it's like definitely a thing with Trails in the Sky where it's like it's a very whimsical RPG.
yeah, using
So
words like whimsy or charm or whatever, but like, yeah, oh, it just looks like Trails in the Sky in the Cold Steel engine or whatever. It's like, no, it looks like Trails in the
it's
Sky.
especially funny seeing people try and say, "Oh, this looks too different from what Falcom usually does. It has to be outsourced." When it's like you can just look at the eyes on the character model and then look at like Agnes's eyes from Daybreak, and it's like, "Oh no, this is the same artist." Maybe you should look at East 10's art style and realize that they can do that sort of cell shaded look, and that's what they're going for here, obviously. But and that makes a lot more sense considering the fact that like East 10 was, again, Switch was the target platform. It seems like that's just sort of what they're going for with that art style if it's a game targeting Switch as the lead platform, which is smart.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely one that I'm excited to play next year. And we'll obviously stay on touch in terms of anything that comes out and post announcement interviews about details of what the game will cover, if it is going to come to other platforms, additions, things like that. And there's just the fact that we can say in one sentence, worldwide release for a Falcom game, that in itself is just insane. One of the last holdouts where it's been a lot more common with Atlas, with Square Enix, things like that in the last 10 years, and Falcom was one of the last holdouts. So if this is truly going to be their first worldwide release, it's they couldn't have picked a better title to do it with.
It really is such a Falcom like action where it's like they said, "Oh, we definitely want to make sure that there's less of a gap between the Japanese and Western releases." And instead of working with a Western publisher to do it, they're just like, "Fuck it, we'll do it ourselves." That is such a Falcom move in retrospect.
Of course, at the Nintendo Partner Direct, we had a few other kind of surprising announcements. Here's one that I don't know if we expected this one particularly, but it seems like the sort of place we'd hear this. And this is the newest entry in the long-running Atelier series. This is Atelier Yumia, the Alchemist of Memories and the Envisioned Land. Of course, over the last 5 or so years, we had the very strong performances of the Atelier Ryza trilogy. Last year, we kind of had a shift with the Atelier Reslariana, which they were marketing as a mainstream flagship title, whatever the language they use, but was free to play, so it was inherently different. But here, it's a little bit back to norm, but also still a little different with Atelier Yumia. We got an announcement trailer for this game. Uh, James, I think you here have the most experience with the Atelier titles. What did you think when you saw this announcement in this trailer?
I'm really digging the aesthetic and what they seem to be going for the vibes, because I very much was a fan of the vibes of the Dusk trilogy, and it seems like they're going for something not quite the same, but similar enough here. So I'm digging that. Also, it wasn't readily apparent in the trailer, but some screenshots did get released later that seem to imply that it's based off of the Ryza combat for like the actual like turn-based battles, which is good because I do think that the Ryza combat system is the best of what I've played in the series. So building off of that is a good thing. So overall, I'm really excited for this. It's also very funny how I've seen some people being like, "Oh, it's just she's just as sexualized as Rise," and it's like not really. I mean that's we're the key art's one thing, but her character design seems it feels like people are telling on themselves just a little bit.
Well, to me, when I see that, I just this is where my mind goes. It's like, oh, it kind of looks like a Genshin character, which kind of looks like a Wuthering Waves character, which kind of looks like a Nikki character. Like it just feels like a lot of them to me, I just kind of bin together. So I don't really like see it as like that. That's not enough to tell me how the game is going to come across in terms of its presentation on its own. I guess you could compare. It does look a little bit different if you compare it to like older titles in the series, like greater than 10 years. But
Yeah,
they go through artists, and
yeah.
we've seen Trails do that. We've seen lots of series do that. I did, yeah. And when talking about the battle style, I remember some people being kind of confused. They're like, "Wait, is this an action game?" Just because the first trailer, the way they kind of cut it up is a lot of like the cinematic abilities. I'm not sure what you call them in the Atelier games, but it as far as we can tell, it is turn based. But the trailer did kind of give the impression that it might not be. Like, oh, they're going that route. We've seen other IPs do that. But like, no, they just kind of tried to make the trailer as cinematic as possible. So that's kind of the way they presented it there. It's slated to be early 2025, which, as far as I recall, all the Ryza games always released in that same time window, like January through March. So it seems like that's kind of where they've liked to, or where Gus has liked to have those titles land. So not a big
I
surprise.
Yeah, I'm terrified about early next year for RPG releases because I think that might actually be when Trails in the Sky the first might be hitting is probably around spring. It certainly
Mhm.
looks like it's far along, and like we know that Falcom's big title for next year is Tokyo Xanadu 2, so that would be the fall release. So it's like, okay, it's probably going to be like spring or summer. And I think if there's already English screenshots, it's like, oh god, oh fuck.
Mhm. Let's see. Also announced at the Nintendo Direct. Again, here's one that we've had long rumors of. It's been a while since Tales of Arise, like what the next remake was going to be. Of course, we had the Symphonia thing that we all kind of poo-pooed on a little bit, unfortunately. Long rumored a Zillia remake, remaster, or something like that. What we got instead, I think to some people's surprise and delight, is the announcement of Tales of Graces F Remastered coming to all consoles in January, on January 2025. So here's a game that I think a lot of people really either love or they just can't get past the 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 character art. I'm not sure if it's the art or
Well,
the
Grace
story,
is
but a lot.
um s- it's not as, like, how do I put it? I think some people still like the story, but it's a much sillier game. It's a little bit kind of, the story narrative stuff is a little bit more like outlandish, cartoony, not super, it like tries to be serious, but it's kind of childish maybe, but it's like the people who love this game, of which I am one, it's more like the combat and the gameplay and the all the mechanics and systems that work together for that. It's a very cohesive game. Um, it's got one of the best, if not the best, combat system in the series. It's very good. So I'm excited for it, primarily for that reason.
Mhm.
There's definitely some
And then,
amusing elements to the story and the character components of it. As soon as this was announced, this is going to sound very uh, uh, weird out of context if you're not already familiar, but I saw people post we have to find the butt, Cheria. We have to find the butt.
yeah,
Yeah. Or
I
like,
mean, if you
there
play the
also,
game, you know. Yep.
there's a meme where it's like, this is my boyfriend Asbel, and this is his boyfriend Richard. Uh, so,
Yep.
yep, it checks out. Um,
And there's a few other things like you can turn off enemy encounters. All the original DLC is included. I guess the grade shop that normally is like for New Game Plus is unlocked right at the start. Uh, they
yeah,
saw
so
newly localized scenes that'll be available in English for the first time.
yeah,
I
I
think that
actually
means
asked
newly
about
voiced.
this. I actually asked about this. Like, um, I'm not sure if we know, like, they're talking about new scenes available in English for the first time. I have no idea what these are. Like, I didn't realize there was any content that wasn't translated that we never got. I have no idea what it's referring to.
I saw Cullen musing that it might be previously unvoiced scenes, but I'm not
Yeah, that might
sure.
make
So
sense. Um, I don't
But
think
then
it's
they
going to
were in
be like
English.
Tales of Vesperia, because Vesperia there was like a ton of content that that was new, and then they did that weird English voice actor swap, which honestly didn't really work out well at all. But I don't know if there's going to be new voices and new scenes here, or that. I mean, it's been such a long time since I played it. I don't remember what wasn't voiced. I mean, all the main stuff was voiced, obviously. So I don't know. That part I'm a little bit confused about.
Yeah, so we'll circle back up on that. But yeah, coming out in January, real cool remaster for a game that I don't yeah, it wasn't available on PC, so now it will be and things like that. And then another remaster that we've been, unlike the other one, which was kind of a surprise announcement, this is one that we've been wondering, when are we going to next hear news about it? This is the Suikoden 1 and 2 HD remaster that was announced a while ago. We had talked about, are we going to finally see more news at TGS? It was finally just in the last couple of weeks announced that it wasn't going to hit its initial release date of 2024. We finally got a new release date for the Suikoden 1 and 2 HD remaster. It'll be coming out on March 6th of next year. And of course, we got a little bit of, I guess the Nintendo Direct showed a little bit of footage, like a minute, and I don't know if it's new footage or not. I didn't like cross-check it with the other trailers. I think the most exciting thing here is that Konami does still remember it, and it is still in the works and has a release date for next year.
I'm super excited for this. I actually, I love Suikoden 2 especially. I mean, that's not super surprising. It's a beloved game from that era. But like, I'm actually really looking forward to like the hopefully improved localization of these games, because Suikoden 2 is one of those games that has like a super heartfelt story and excellent character writing, kind of despite a kind of janky, junky localization at the time. So like, if they can basically improve that to suit the story it tells, it could be really good.
And then kind of the last thing that I think was first announced last year in 2023 from Marvelous is a new Rune Factory game, but more styled as a pure action RPG and not kind of like the farming sim RPG hybrid that a lot of those have been. Originally known as Project Dragon, it now has a full title called Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma. Coming out next spring, and we got another look in at this. We already knew a little bit about the story premise, about how it had two playable characters. We have Subaru and Kaguya. Talked about the different play styles for these. And then, of course, some people are wondering, like they talked about, I forget what context it was, how it wasn't going to have the farming elements, how it's going to almost, as far as I can tell, just be pure action RPG, but in the Rune Factory universe. So as a true, like, more like a spin-off title or a companion title in that sense. But I got a new trailer for it. I don't know. From compared to other Rune Factory games, the trailer is just I know like we talked about the performance of the Rune Factory 5 coming out on Switch and things like that before it came out in other systems. It just looks like it's had time to bake, so to speak. So the trailer itself, I don't have any attachment or investment to Rune Factory, but the trailer itself looks pretty well put together in terms of like, oh, this could actually be a surprising like a sleeper hit or a cult hit for those that are been looking forward to this sort of game or who have been playing Rune Factory for a while. So
Yeah,
I don't know if
I've
Chow is
seen
going to be on deck for this.
I've seen some people actually, you know, show hesitation for like, I don't know if I want a Rune Factory action RPG. Like, it's almost too different from what Rune Factory is. But I guess that's kind of the whole reason why it's not called Rune Factory 5. It is a spin-off, so they're trying something different.
I mean, Rune Factory 6.
Or 6. Sorry, there is a Rune Factory 6. Like, they've announced that that's happening, so this isn't a replacement. But yeah, I have seen people show hesitation for like, I don't know if I like this idea. I mean, again, like you, I don't really have any attachment to the series, but I agree, it looks nice, like the trailer and the designs and the art style and everything. So, but yeah,
Okay,
I think it's basically
I-
being positioned as a spin-off, which it should be.
So basically, I was trying to make sure I looked at all the previous information back in summer at like the Marvelous Game Showcase. They said that the two characters will use the power of dance rather than farming. However, in this newest trailer, there does show a little bit of farming elements, so it might still be present in like a limited fashion. I'm not sure because it very clearly shows them creating like a little like a rice paddy and some water wheels. So there are still farming elements. Maybe Marvelous, the way they presented the previous trailer, saying that the characters use dance instead of farming, just got people the wrong impression. But it looks like it is still present, at least to some extent. So I guess we'll keep an eye on that to see how different it is compared to the mainline series. And I think we do have a few more things that we'll be talking about as we kind of wrap up the news portion of this podcast that did come out of the Nintendo Direct. Below those 5 things were kind of like the key highlights. Here's one that is coming out later this year. We did get a small update for Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remaster, talking about the Monster Wrangler vocation. So this is something that, as far as I can tell, is brand new to the HD2D remake.
People
So kinda
actually
cool, like, that's
had already basically figured this out for a few reasons.
Oh.
Like I think in maybe a few screenshots, or maybe more explicitly, there was like a special edition in Japan maybe that had like little acrylic figures of like all the different classes, and people noticed, wait a minute, I don't recognize
an
that
extra
class.
one.
Yeah, and just from the design, people guessed it's probably a monster class. And here's the actual official reveal. Yes, there's a new Monster Wrangler class. And we'll see how that works exactly. Obviously, monster wrangling is not new at all to Dragon Quest, so it'll probably work similarly as it does in some of the other games. But yeah, that's basically the new class, is the Monster Wrangler, or at least one of the new classes. I don't know if we expect any more, but this one for sure.
We also got a new trailer for the upcoming Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom, of course, coming out at the end of September. This one, I don't know if he'll be able to talk about too much because I think Josh is actually going to be playing this. He might be
He
playing it
already
right
played
now
it.
at PAX. So we'll probably get some direct impressions from him next week. So the main thing that this trailer shows, there's kind of 2 key things here that it shows. Uh, it shows the still world, which is, I guess, most analogous to like the depths of Tears of the Kingdom, basically going into the rifts at different points in the overworld, and it's like an extended dungeon that Zelda can travel through. And the trailer talks about, depending on where you enter the rifts from, it kind of changes the layout of and the environment of the still world. And then the other thing is that it talked about how Zelda will have the ability to, oh, I forget what it calls it in game, but she will have the ability to temporarily power herself up to use a sword
I think it's
and
called
have combat
Swordfighter
that is,
Form.
there you go. Yeah, Swordfighter Form, where she'll basically be able to act directly in combat, just like Link would. It looks like it really is just animations from the Link's Awakening remake from a couple years back. But like, so she will be able to, on the based on the power of like a magic meter, be able to access that form at certain points. So there is some direct combat there. And then I guess the last thing that the trailer showed is it was trying to highlight the different characters, and it seems like there's a kind of a wide array of goofy, quirky, fun characters. It's focused on Dompe, who in this game is not a gravekeeper, but he's like a tinkerer, and he has little
Yeah, he makes.
automatons.
Yeah,
And
you get automatons, like little robots that can actually break, I guess.
yeah,
To help you out.
so not only does she have like the echoes that she can summon, but it showed her like throwing like a Tektite bomb into a bunch of enemies. And I think that could be really cool if it has like really cool itemization behind it, like economy of like, oh, I've got these resources, I can build this up. It'd be interesting to see how exactly that works. And I'm not worried at all based on Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, how the itemization there is really cohesive and well thought out. That this is just kind of another verb, so to speak, for Zelda to have access to as she explores through this game. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that the variety in environments is pretty incredible that they've shown in the trailer. So obviously talking about trailers on a podcast, we'll talk about, very difficult but very fun. I'm excited for this. It's probably my most, out of all of September releases, the one that I've got circled on my calendar, even though it ekes in right at the end of the month in September 26th. Let's see. We already talked about the Claire Obscure gameplay. Let's see. Okay, Owlcat Games. We talked about this back 2 weeks ago. Owlcat, the developer behind the Pathfinder and the recent Rogue Trader 40K CRPGs, they're going to be in the publishing space now. They talked about that they're going to be publishing 2 projects. One of which was Rue Valley, which you already got a trailer for, and another which was Shadow of the Road, which at the part of the publishing announcement, we didn't have a trailer for Shadow of the Road, but I think I pulled up some really old like alpha footage from it, and it was like, oh, this is our most recent footage that we got. And then like Speak of the Devil, They've given an announcement trailer for Shadow of the Road. Doesn't have a release date, but it was kind of interesting to say like, oh, I was just watching alpha footage of this game just like a week ago, and now to see it under the new publisher agreement that Another Angle Games, that's the title of the developer, Another Angle Games has with Owlcat. So isometric, kind of like retro future feudal Japan. It's a very interesting mix, like feudal Japan plus Robo Scorpions, and then you can kind of extrapolate from there. So it looks fun, but also still looks like a little bit of a little ways off. But it's something we'll keep our eye on.
I mean, it's really interesting to see basically Owlcat. They, as far as I understand it, they pretty much absorbed the publisher that helped them publish like the other Pathfinder games on like consoles and other platforms. And so now they're kind of just taking over that publishing and kind of picking out games, that are similar in some ways maybe to their style, but it's just an interesting thing to see.
We also did get a release window and a new trailer for a first-person RPG, Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon. I know this game has been available in early access for a while. I really don't know what the impressions are. Oh, this showed up at the one of the Xbox Gamescom
Yeah.
streaming events. So this one, like the trailer itself, unfortunately there's nothing really stands out to it. It seems like the trailer does not perform very well. A lot of the first-person combat seems kind of choppy to me. But the art style and vibe seem good. What I would most likely, now that I've seen this trailer and I know that Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon is coming out early next year, what I would like to see are what impressions of the early access release are.
I just pull up the Steam version, the Steam page, just real quick. It's got 3,000 reviews, almost 2,500, and they're very positive. So,
okay, yeah. So that's one thing like that I'm kind of interested just in principle, but also in early 2025. To me, if I wanted to play a first-person RPG, it'd probably be playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2.
It's Kingdom Come Deliverance and Avowed are like a week apart.
Oh, that's true.
Like last year, or this year, I should say, haven't had a lot of like Western RPGs. I mean, there was like the Thaumaturge, and we have Dragon Quest or Dragon Age coming out. But next year, we got 2 first-person, pretty big RPGs, Western style, like within a week.
Yeah, in the last couple of years for Western RPGs, obviously Baldur's Gate 3, huge and incredibly popular. It's Cyberpunk, of course, but even that was, that was a saga all on its own,
right?
In terms of release and all the way to all that stuff. But yeah, it really feels like starting this fall and into next year gets finally some really exciting projects in that space. Let's see what else we've got. At the Nintendo Direct, I guess this was on the Japanese Nintendo Direct, but Kite made sure to cover it for us. Shiren the Wanderer, of course, released earlier this year in January and February for the Switch, is going to get a DLC pack that's just going to come in 2 waves. It's basically like 2 bundled expansion passes. It's only announced for Japan right now, priced at 1,800 yen. So I guess what, $15 ish at the current exchange rates. And basically, it's just cool that Shiren the Wanderer is going to continue to get support throughout the year from Spike Sunsoft for those that have gone into that game. Again, another one that I kind of have circled on my backlog that I'm like, I want to get to this, but February was so packed and I haven't had enough of a gap to get back to it. And yeah, no announcement in the West for the new DLC packs. Let's see what it adds. Each part will add 5 dungeons, so a total of 10 new dungeons. I'm trying to look at here what Kite was able to write up about what these things will add. The first update will come out in Japan on September 5th. It will add Kappa as a new playable character. We've had a few of these updates for Phantom Brave, the Lost Hero, basically a newsletter dump, screenshots and descriptors for new characters and a couple more mechanics involving equipment. Adam, you put this together. Is there any highlight here for Phantom Brave: The Lost Hero? What they
There's
showed
a
off this
big.
week?
So I played some of the Disgaea games, but I have not played Phantom Brave. Although I played a little bit of it. But this update, there's actually a big component. These are kind of Nippon Ichi Disgaea-ish things, where like one of them is you can equip any item, like as like equipment, and that includes things like rocks and leaves and just stuff you can pick up. You can just equip it because why not? You can equip anything. And then there's also a component to this update. There's like a pretty big focus on like, if this enemy is too strong for you to defeat, you can always just throw them out of bounds. or something like that. I don't remember all the specific details, but there's actually like this whole like out of bounds component, which they call OB, where you can just like you can take on enemies or defeat them kind of just by manipulating the map position and just throwing them out. Out of bounds, you're out. Why not?
That's how I beat that one vampire in Baldur's Gate 3 before they patched it. So there you go. And then we also got a similar sort of newsletter news dump for the upcoming Romancing Saga 2. This one's focusing on a lot of different characters and character classes, so you can read through that. The interesting thing here, I don't know if this was originally in Romancing Saga or if this is new, but there's a glimmer chart which can show like what abilities certain people are able to learn, and
That's
a little bit of what that UI might look like. And to me, I'm like, oh, to me that seems like new and neat, and not something that in the Saga games I've played I don't think I've had access to.
that is I'm pretty sure that is new. It's kind of funny. In previous Saga games, there is like a structure or a chart to like what skills can glimmer what other skills, but it's mostly hidden from the player. Like people figure it out, after the fact. Like this skill can lead to this skill or whatever. But this game, they're just kind of giving it to you. Like, okay, you can glimmer from this ability to this ability or whatnot. So.
Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit about formations. There's a little bit about equipment systems, and then there was one other thing I wanted to highlight here. But what was
these
it?
updates that they've been giving for Romancing Saga 2 Remake, a lot of so there's more than like 30 different types of characters you can get this game. So each of these updates kind of shows more of the characters. Like in this one, they show like the strategist. They showed a mermaid. They showed the fisher. I think they show the mole person. I don't know if the fisher person is playable, but anyways. And then they also, what they're calling it now is like the free-form scenario. Because if you're not familiar with Romancing Saga 2 and a lot of Saga games, like you do these different kind of story packets that you go, and when you explore the world, like different little scenarios that you run into. And in Romancing Saga 2, they oftentimes have like different ways to achieve them and different outcomes depending on how you do it. And that kind of shapes the world in that way. And so each of these updates kind of goes through a different one. And this update has to do with like the sunken ship. And there's a couple different ways to like get the mermaid potion to get down to the sunken ship. So that's what's in this update. The other part of this update that is kind of new to this update is they talk about a lot of the kingdom building stuff you do. And a lot of this stuff is actually relatively new. Talk about like the garden. They talk about like the academy, which is not new. And how you get magic and abilities, and there's like a ranking system. I actually didn't dive deep into all of it, but there's a lot in terms of all this kingdom building stuff that's included now.
And there's also, I guess, Mr. S.
Yeah,
going
Mr.
around
S.
town.
This part is actually kind of blatant. If you played Trials of Mana, and you look at the screenshot that they have for Mr. S, like they just took the little cactus mechanic from Trials of Mana and just repurposed it. Because it's got like this sort of like sticker chart that you do. If you're not aware, Trials of Mana, the remake, was made by Zine. I think that's how you pronounce it. And now this game is also made by Zine. And they just took the same mechanic and same UI and everything, and just replaced Little Cactus with Mr. S, who is sort of the Saga.
Now here's one thing
Go ahead.
Like that's what I was going to ask. So I've played a handful of Saga games, but I first encountered Mr. S, I believe, in Emerald Beyond. Was he around before then?
Yeah, he's not like a huge mascot, but he's been around.
Yeah, because I didn't see him.
I guess it
in
seems
Scarlet
like
Grace.
I guess it seems like they're
Right.
trying to reinvigorate him as the mascot of the series, though.
Yeah.
Between
Yeah,
like
'cause I didn't
remember.
I didn't remember him in Saga Frontier Remaster or
I don't think he's in any of the other
Scarlet
Romancing
Grace.
Saga games before this.
Okay. Because it was like Mr. S is a familiar face to any Saga fan.
He's more like a creature that's in like the original Saga games or the remakes. I don't know. I don't think he's in any of the original like Romancing Sagas or in Saga Frontier. So yeah, he's not a super prevalent mascot, but I guess he's sort of becoming one or trying to.
Mm-hmm. And I think the rest of this podcast will just be going into a few more release dates. Honkai Star Rail has a new version launching on September 10th, version 2.5. We don't have Chow
What's
here.
up with this?
Yeah. All right, so introducing Pei Xiao, Ling Xia, and Mose. So I don't know who these characters are, but looks neat. But yeah, we'll see. I'm guessing maybe by the time, well, let's see. It's September 10th, so this will still be pending by the time Chao's back for next week. So we'll ask about it then. Here's one. I put this down in the date section, but it is kind of an announcement. We were wrong. Dragon Quest Monsters 3: The Dark Prince, or I guess there's no 3 here. Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince was not shadow dropped. It was announced for PC for September 11th, 2 weeks out.
They just
So
happened to do the exact same thing that they did with Dragon Quest Builders PC version, where it's like, okay, you get 2 weeks, heads up, that's it. I don't know how well this is going to do on PC, considering they have the whole caveat where it doesn't have the multiplayer, because that seems like, I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm kind of interested in this just because like I've played Treasures and I've played I guess just Treasures, huh? I'm trying to think. Is there another one?
Did
No.
you play 11?
I'm like, all right, this
You played 11.
I did play. I did play 11, yeah. And I kind of always thought of this as like, even though it's not the same series technically, if because was Treasures, I forget, was that originally announced as a Monsters title
Yes,
or
it
a different
was.
title? Yeah, and then it kind of spun off into its own thing. So this one I'm kind of interested in as like a fringe Dragon Quest fan, and obviously we don't really know the status of 12. I guess we have the three remake and the 1 and 2 remake coming out, but yeah, I don't think this is going to do super well. I'm surprised it's not coming out for like other consoles. Like it just
Well,
seems like
it's coming
a
out for mobile
miss.
devices.
That's yeah.
It's sort of a joke. I mean, it's kind of interesting, but I don't know if you have your choice of playing it on Switch, a phone, or a PC. Like I don't know. I feel like phone is not the best choice, but no.
Maybe we're just not the audience for that.
Yeah.
But we'll be interested. Square Enix still trying things, and they've promised that they're going to be a little bit more standard about what their release schedule. So maybe this is just lingering old paradigm in terms of this Square Enix scatter shot of how they release their titles. But yeah, I mean, I poo poo on it, but like I'm probably gonna play this on Steam and see how it looks.
Yeah.
I'll actually be going on a cruise like starting like a few days after this launches, so it might be like my Switch deck cruise game. So that might be an interesting. Like, yeah, I played this thing on a boat. We'll see how it goes.
Dragon Quest Monsters 3, it is 3. They just took out the 3 in the English release, or the
Right.
English title. It has that tie to Dragon Quest 4, but it feels like that's more just like flavor or setting. And I know in Cullen's review anyway, he reviewed the original version. Like if you're looking for this to be like a sequel sidequel to 4, that's not really what it's great at. I'm looking at that sort of connection more just like the table setting. Like, okay, it's kind of in the 4 world.
Mm.
That's it. I'm not expecting like a sequel or any big revelations or whatever.
Here's one that's a bit of a surprise. October 24th for Switch, they'll be getting Yakuza Kiwami. This is the like the remaster reimagining the original Yakuza that originally released back in 2016. So yes, you can start there for the long running Yakuza series if you're a Switch player.
It releases the same day as the Yakuza series, like the television one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's weird that they're doing Kiwami in that case, considering what we know about the TV series is that it's at least loosely based off of Zero. Not the same thing, but it borrows plot elements from it. And I feel like
I
Zero is the one that most people nowadays recommend you start with.
thought the
Just
series was based on one, not Zero.
no. Like
No,
from what I could see from the plot synopsis. Let me double check.
I
saw
do
some
agree with you
people
though that
commenting that like, why didn't they call it like a dragon? But I kind of feel like if this same game is already on other platforms as Yakuza Kiwami, you might be just causing more confusion if you give it a different title on Switch. If it gets like remade again in some fashion, then maybe you can go ahead and repurpose the Like a Dragon name. But for a port, I think it's fine. Just call it Yakuza Kiwami, even though the series
Also,
itself is now Like a Dragon.
I forget who it was specifically at Sega that said it, but their explanation for it was that after that specific chapter in Like a Dragon, Yakuza 7, Yakuza Like a
Yakuza
Dragon.
Like a Dragon. Yeah.
After that specific chapter where it was literally called the end of Yakuza, that was in their eyes, the official point when the name changed.
Yeah, we
So-
said that
Works.
before, right?
Yeah. So I guess in that case,
but-
it would make sense for Kiwami to still be Yakuza if that's their explanation for it.
And I agree with you that Yakuza is the one series where most of the time, whenever a prequel is released, I'm like, well, you play the prequel after the original because the prequel is intended to be a prequel. Like you're supposed to be familiar with the events that are yet to be in universe. But I will say that Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami, I think part of the reason people are equally likely, in my opinion, to suggest either one as a starting point is because like Yakuza Kiwami probably makes more sense to introduce the characters because obviously that's what it originally did. But Yakuza 0 is also just like a much better received game and also does a really good job introducing all the characters in the world. So it's like, oh, you should just play 0. It's a better game, and it also does everything just about as well, if not way better. So if Adam, who I don't think has played any of these, were to ask me which one to start with, I would say, and Gundam I had, and I had to pick one and not to say both. I would probably say 0. But if a Switch player said, all I've got is the Switch, I'd be like, Kiwami's a good place as well. We also have Fairy Tail 2 is going to release on December 13th. We'll see if we can strong arm Chow into reviewing that for us.
I have a feeling this is just going to be one of those games that none of us play because it's just one of those properties that no one's interested in, which happens sometimes.
Yeah, we just don't have a Fairy Tail fan on staff, and luckily we have the flexibility here that if no one's really interested, no one's going to be like pulling a short straw to be like, well, I guess I got to cover this. But I guess if you're listening to this and you're interested in Fairy Tail 2,
reach out to Alex Donaldson if you want to cover it for us. That's all you have to do.
If you're here listening to hour 2.5 of this episode of our podcast and you want to write a review, go ahead and reach out. We will take pitches for games like this. That falls perfectly into that space. Stray Children. This is the game from the studio that made the game Moon, Onion Games. It'll be releasing for Japan.
Sort of like the studio that made the re-release of Moon.
Thank you for the
clarification. I'm nitpicking, so it's not like the original developer, which is like Lovedelic or something like that.
Yeah, Stray Children has a Japanese release date. Will coming out December 26th. It's listed still as an English release, but as TBD on the English website. So Lovedelic made the original Moon. Onion Games made a remaster of Moon, and then Onion Games is now making Stray Children, coming out in Japan on December 26th for Nintendo Switch. Here's one that was going to release just within a few weeks. Demon School. We've talked about this game a handful of times. Was originally going to. It's been around in a few of the summer festivals. We've covered it a handful of times. Was originally going to finally release on September 13th, but the studio Necrosoft Games has announced that they are going to push it back to 2025 for they just want to have more time to really polish it and touch it up, which fair to them. Let it cook, because I know a lot of people have seen this and played demos of it and have been pretty excited for it. Demon School will come out slated early next year. And then the last two things we have here are kind of shutdown announcements. I don't know. We seem to be in the habit of leaving those last. Here's one that I've never played this, but I still read this headline and go, wow, that's surprising. Final Fantasy Brave Exvius will be shutting down operations for its global edition on October 30th. So within about 2 months. All microtransactions have been suspended. I guess the Japanese version will potentially continue because it says specifically the global version will be shutting down on October 30th. Brave Exvius has been around for about 8 years. Originally launched in 2016. This is the one place where having Josh or Chow around might actually be helpful.
Yeah, I don't play any of these mobile games, so I'm just like, okay.
Yeah, they could have. Maybe we'll ask their opinion on it next week.
I mean, 8 years feels like, I know like some games last a lot longer than 8 years, but I think you feel like 8 years is pretty good.
8 years feels like a good run, yeah.
Like Grand Blue Fantasy, isn't that 10 years old? I forget, how old is Grand Blue Fantasy?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
And then this last one, this is a game that I was actually once upon a time pretty excited for but will now no longer get a global release. From Bandai Namco Online, Blue Protocol will end service in January of next year, and its planned English release in partnership with Amazon Games is canceled. So Blue Protocol, I think this is the second project from Bandai Namco Online after Gundam Evolution, which also shut down like a year after launching. So not a good track record. I had heard that some of the original betas for Blue Protocol were kind of not middling. I didn't really hear a lot about the reception after full release in Japan back in June of 23. Obviously, having Amazon as a big publishing partner, I know Amazon has had a lot of kind of uh, failures. The Crucible game obviously was kind of on their track record, but they did also successfully support and continue to support New World, even though I guess even that has its own caveats with its weird console release coming up.
But I don't. I think we have to be careful that I see some people like their immediate response to this news was Amazon fucked up again. It's like no. This game, when it released in Japan last year, it's been struggling kind of the whole time, and Amazon had nothing to do with the Japanese release. It was in Bandai Namco's fiscal reports and Bandai Namco's online fiscal reports that it just was not catching on. It wasn't making money. It was just not doing well. I saw that like the Korean servers for the game basically went on. I don't know the full details, but I think it were like released, but then they basically paused it and said like, indefinitely, we'll come back to this, and apparently that's not going to happen. So like even before we even touched the English release, which was Amazon was coordinating, this game was struggling. So
we kind of knew like a few months ago that this was probably what was happening, just because at Summer Game Fest this was completely missing in action.
Yeah.
So the assumption was it was probably just not going to happen, and lo and behold.
It was a Summer Games Fest where it was announced, right? Or was it a video game Game Awards?
I think it was originally announced in 2019 in Japan, but in terms of like the global release, I think it was I think it was the Game Awards 2022. Let me take a look. No, I have this down.
But either way, canceled. So unfortunate.
Right around the Game Awards.
I know a lot of people had some high hopes for it. Just didn't turn out. Yeah, so with that, we've successfully covered the news of the Nintendo Partner Showcase, Nintendo Direct. I think precedent shows that Nintendo tends to also have another Nintendo Direct in September, like a first
we usually don't have Nintendo Directs in August, I think.
The assumption I've seen people make as the reason why we had one in August is manufacturing for the Switch 2 is supposedly starting soon, and so the idea is they're probably going to actually fully reveal it and like talk about it probably next month, just to get ahead of things, and so people can start talking about it I assume TGS.
I do like how Nintendo, they're like, we're going to show the unveiling of the Nintendo Museum. No, there will not be any Switch successor here. Here's a partner direct. No, there will not be a Switch successor here. Like, good on them for making it very clear. But I know the audience has kind of like made that almost a necessity. Like, yeah, we're going to be focusing on third-party games. We're focusing on this. We're not going to be focusing on. So that'll make it very clear once they do decide to lift the curtain on that. I think everyone will know and everyone will have their eyes on it. And obviously, next week we'll have Josh back from PAX. We'll have Chow back, and he'll be able to talk about the upcoming update to Honkai Star Rail. We'll talk a little bit more about Visions of Mana. I'm not sure if anything else was currently slated for like a late August time frame. We'll probably talk about Gundam Breaker too, Gundam Breaker 4, since Josh will be able to speak to that. So I think it's a pretty good lineup for next week, and of course talking about their time in PAX. Maybe we can see if we can get Cullen on to talk about Visions. Maybe we can get Scott to also talk about PAX. We'll have to see. We'll have to send some IMs and see who we can get on board. But yeah. Any other final closing comments before we wrap up?
Don't think so.
You can find all of the articles that we talked about over on our website at rpgsite.net. You can find RPG Site on pretty much all the social media platforms. Just search for RPG Space Site and you should be able to find us. That includes the review for Visions of Mana, the review for Emio the Smiling Man, also the previews that Adam wrote, as well as Alex from Gamescom. You can find our Discord, discord.gg/RPG site. We've had a lot of new traffic in the last couple weeks, so go ahead and jump on there and join the community. If you've listened to this podcast on whatever podcast service you like, please leave us a like and a rating or a comment. We love to see those. Let us know what we're doing well. Let us know what we can improve on. And we'll be back next week with another episode of the Tetracast. So until you hear from us next time, stay safe and take care. And we'll talk to y'all later.
Yeah.